All right, welcome everybody, and welcome to all of you as well. I was telling Ezra, he's one of our sixth graders, that you guys are all here because he was going to be presenting. So we're excited. He's excited. What I wanted to do, this is an opportunity for us as a school to kind of share some of the great things that are going on at Beeman. So at this time, though, I would like to invite Ezra, who is one of our current sixth graders, up here to, sorry for you guys to turn around. And like you said, well, Ezra, do you want to kind of just share a little bit about the project first before you read yours?
Yeah. So, on Wednesdays we have library, and so we go down there and we use Pixton, which is a website where you can use you can make comics and make your own characters and just make a comic strip about something you like, or just make a random comic strip with you and your friends or whatever. And so in this project, we've had subjects in the past like scavenger hunt and just anything you want to make. And so on this project we made something about Beeman and what makes it special and what we enjoy, and some things were like mentors from the Middlebury College, the Boston Science Museum field trip 2 years ago, Camp Common Ground, anything that you wanted that was an event that happened, or just anything that makes Beeman special. And the one that I chose to do the DCF competition, and that's whenever you sign up and you have to read 5 books from the Dorothy Canfield Fisher award, and it's from that section, and we have a section in the library from those. And so you read 5 books, and then you go up to the high school, Mount Abe, and then you get a team, and your team name is like a town, and then you rally up, or you tally up points for the questions about the books, and so that's what I chose. And I started out with, the first one was a bus going down a street, and that was us, and then I said, I put a speech bubble and said, on the way to the DCF competition. And then then on my next one, it was like a school, and then I had my 4 characters that I created, and it says, yay, we're at the school. And then we're in the library where we did it, and I'm sitting at a chair, and I'm like, yay, we got 100 more points. And then I'm in like a type of like theater, but it was like a library sort of, and they're looking up at the board. And the first one says, here we're looking up at the board, here we're celebrating. And I said, yeah, yay, 16,000 points, we won. And then it's a bus going back to the school, and then it's just like a random red background, and I wrote, the DCF competition is about groups from different schools or different kids from different schools, and they go to the Mount Abraham High School and compete and answer various questions about the DCF books. It is kind of like Jeopardy, but just all about books. And you count up the scores at the end, and if you have the highest score, then you win. That is the DCF competition and what it's about. And that was just explaining all about it. And at the end, I did like a background and me playing football, and they wanted you to talk about, they wanted you to put your name and things that you like. And I said, hi, I'm Ezra, I like football, and my lizard and my dog. And it's me throwing a football, and my lizard and my dog.
And so we had our 6th grade, well, yeah. So we had our 6th graders, not all of them are in this, but I handed out to the board, and we can make more copies, but it's a collection of their work. And at the very last page, we tied in the ends policy and talked about some of those pieces of it, and what makes Beeman great, and what the 6th graders came up with. And then we tied in at the last page how you can kind of see where we do tie in with the ends policy, which is important. That's what we're here for, our kids, and how to help them be successful And so we tied that in there as well. And I want to just, again, thank Ezra for coming out and thank you for
And just know that when you hear the tick, tick, ticking back here, that means there's heat, and that's good. When the ticking stops, that's when it becomes a problem.
Are you all set to go? All right. Okay.
That's his last name. Howard, that's right. Yeah, thank you.
Everyone ready? Okay. All right. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:10. And before we get started, I want to let board members know that I'm adding an executive session after public comment. Our times are a little off tonight, so there will be an executive session after public comment. And we will leave. So we're going to go upstairs to that room we just saw with the rolling chairs. We're going to move, so everyone knows. Let's see. All right. Before we get going, I want to give my reminder to board members that about our public comment period is an opportunity to listen to public comments, but not debate the issues or enter into a question and answer session between individuals here to give public comment and the board. Not all issues brought before the board tonight will be resolved, and there might be times when we respond to the public comment by seeking additional information or having the superintendent investigate an issue further. Our meetings are recorded tonight by Meet TV, and some of the comments can be made tonight can be around an emotional issue, and understandably so. So I'll strive to maintain a certain decorum with the meeting. As a board, we are tasked with creating an overall context for everything the organization does rather than reacting to issues. Policy governance enables the board to lead by using a framework of written policies. And to provide a framework, you can't, by definition, jump into the middle of any issue. You have to stand back and take a broader, long-term perspective. So as we listen tonight to comments, please remember that we are governing on behalf of our owners, and collectively we shoulder the responsibility for the proper care of this organization in the interest of all current and future beneficiaries. On our agenda tonight, it lists 5 minutes for the consent agenda. I'm going to allow 15 minutes for the public comment. There is an opportunity at the end of the meeting, and if it's not too late, we can allow more time at the end of the meeting for a public comment. So, as I give direction to the board, I also feel it's important for the community to know my responsibilities as board chair. And one of my responsibilities as board chair is to maintain the integrity of this meeting. I see there are a lot of people here, and there will be time at the end of the meeting, so if you don't get to talk, you have that opportunity. But if you are part of a larger group, maybe you have one person who could speak on your behalf, so that a couple more people could get a chance to speak before we have to end the public comment period. I also want to let communities know that we cannot discuss personnel items in public session. It protects us. It protects the people who work in our organization. It's just not a practice that we have any discussion about personnel in a public session. So if everybody would take a minute to state what they have to say. When you're recognized, will you please state your name so the minute taker can add that into the minutes, and we'll go from there. So at this time, let's do a quick introduction just of names of everybody at the table, and then we'll go into public comment. You want to start?
Allison Sturdivant.
Steve Rooney from Starksboro. Kevin Hansen, Bristol.
Caleb Elder, Starksboro.
I'm Krista Seringa from Bristol.
Liz Sarah from Bristol.
Amy Heath from Lincoln.
Erin Lathrop, Bristol. Sarah McLean, Lincoln. Sarah LaPearl, New Haven. Jen Stanley, Moncton.
Andrew Morton, New Haven.
Patrick Green, Superintendent.
Dawn Griswold from Moncton. So at this time, it's 6:15, so we'll go to 6:30 with public comment. Is there anyone who would like to start out with a public comment?
Can we get all the people who have come to this meeting in this room?
If everybody wants to squeeze in.
I think we should.
Daniel, are you going to start? Sure.
Hi, my name is Tom Lyman. I'm a resident of Moncton. I'm a teacher at Mount Abraham. I've taught there for 34 years. I'm the co-president of ANITA, which is the Teacher Association. I would encourage the board to postpone its acceptance of Justin Bouyer's resignation until a further review is done of the administrative practices at Mount Abe. I believe there are issues that could benefit from a further review of administrative practices there. Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Alan Cameron. I'm a resident of Lincoln, Vermont. I also happen to work at Mount Abraham Union High School. It's my understanding tonight that there's a letter of resignation by Justin Bouvier. I just want to state a couple of things. I want to state, first of all, that Justin has been an asset to Mount Abraham Union High School. While it's his decision to make, the decision he's making, I think it's important to state he's been an administrator who pays attention to the daily logistics of running the school, which I find very important, and he's really a good colleague and a good asset to the school. His decision is his decision. I wish that more consideration would be given in similar line to what Mr. Lerman said. I just want to make an observation, and I will be brief here, is Justin would be the 7th administrator to leave Mount Abraham since June of 2014, which I think is a pretty astonishing fact. In addition to that, if I'm not mistaken, since the summer of 2012, 4 additional administrators have left the district office. And if I counted correctly, at least 5 elementary school principals have left. So over a period of 6 years, we've had 16 administrators leave the district. So I'm only making an observation with that. I read nothing into it. But I understand some might be retirements, but I also am aware that some have been what I'll call premature. So I guess what I would encourage with my comment is just that we look at the fact that there's such an astonishing turnover of administrators in this district, and I would thank you to consider that as something to look into in the coming days and weeks and months. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Danielle Hill. I'm a parent of student at Mount Abe. I'm also a business owner in Bristol. I, along with a couple other parents, have kind of spearheaded the community concern group. At this point, when I last checked before I left home, there's over 250 signatures on a brief statement that I'd like to read of a petition on change.org. It simply says, we the undersigned are either 1, parents of students who attend Mount Abraham Middle School and High School, 2, are residents of Bristol, Starksboro, Lincoln, Moncton, New Haven, or 3, are former students of Mount Abraham. Our signatures on this document indicate that we are in support of the majority voice of both the faculty, the staff, and the students of Mount Abraham in regard to the resignation of Assistant Principal Justin Bouvier. We are asking the school board to facilitate the necessary changes that would allow Justin to rescind his resignation and remain a vital, integral member of the administration. I would also like to state that at no point in time since this had come to light has Justin violated his confidentiality agreement or disclosed to any member of this parent committee the reasons in which he resigned from Mount Abe. He has maintained his professionalism at all times and has refused to violate the standards in which he holds himself to. The outpouring of community support has stemmed from the many, many people who know Justin personally and professionally and know that something must be very, very wrong at Mount Abe in order for him to feel that his only option was to resign. I have drafted a letter which I will not read for time reasons, but I've also, at this point in time, the petition hasn't been online for more than 24 hours. So I'm not allowed to print the names until it's been posted for 24 hours. So after 24 hours, I will print the petition, the names, and all the comments. In the meantime, I've copied and pasted some of the comments on here, and I'll leave them with you to read the many, many voices of support for Justin. And I would just ask that if Justin is willing to rescind his resignation, that the board would be willing to accept that in order to allow time to facilitate any changes that could happen at Mount Abe to keep him.
Thank you.
I'm Darcy Tardy. My daughter Emily Tardy couldn't be here, so this is a child's voice pulling forward on the same subject. It says to the Mount Abraham Unified School District Board, my name is Emily Tardy. I could not be here tonight due to prior commitments, but I felt my words needed to be heard regardless of my attendance. I asked my mother, Darcy Tardy, to speak on my behalf this evening. I'm proud to call myself both a student of Mount Abraham Union High School and a friend of Mr. Justin Bouvier. I met Justin first through the hallways of Mount Abe, as all of us students do, then grew to love him more through his selfless contributions to the Mount Abe Spring Musical. Excuse me. Justin Bouvier is the shining epitome of kindness, acceptance, and unparalleled dedication. Each morning, unless he's in an administrative meeting, Justin's smiling face can be seen greeting all 700 some odd students, wishing them well on their day ahead. Never in my life have I met someone who cares so unequivocally for each and every person that they meet. Over numerous years, Justin has slowly worked his way up the chain of commands, finally landing in the position I know for a cold hard fact is his absolute dream job. At Mount Abe, he's worked as the substitute teacher, a custodian, a paraeducator, a math teacher, an administrative liaison, the dean of students, and finally the assistant principal for grades 10 through 12. So why is it that after years and years of hard work and dedication leading up to his dream job, that he would submit a letter of resignation mid-semester? That I do not have the answer to. What I do know is that the internal problems that currently exist, that even students have begun to see, will only worsen if Justin Bouvier leaves the administration. I've heard students say, don't pressure him into staying, or he's not going to be happy here. But to that I say, there is in no way a man who has worked his whole life to be exactly where he is right now would truly want to leave unless there are major fundamental issues in our school's administrative system. I'm going to stop for length because I know there's others. It continues on. So, Miss Emily Tardy says thank you.
Is there anyone, I can't see if there's anyone back there that has any interest in speaking. No? Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. My name is Camille Lyons. I'm also a student at Mount Abraham, and I'm a co-president of MASA, Mount Abe Student Activism. I'm feeling very underprepared for this meeting. Everyone has things written down, but I would like to just say that Justin has such a big impact on our school and our community, and it wouldn't be the same without him. And from my small understanding of the issue, it wouldn't hurt to take just some more time to look into it as a whole instead of just drastically changing our lives, my life especially.
Thank you.
I'm Scott Beckwith. I am not a member of the five-town district, but I live in Burlington, Vermont, and I teach at Mount Abraham. And I try not to get emotional, but I will. When I started teaching 12 years ago, Justin was one of the first people I met. Made me feel welcome. As a gay man in my school, he's also an ally that I have in the building. And he's been an ally to many kids in the building. Mm-hmm. And so what he means to the community is crucial in this time and this day and age. The other aspect of this is a few years ago when we were searching for an assistant principal, the faculty meeting, I recall, we said we want the assistant principal to be about 5'9", dark hair, and he goes by the name of Justin, okay? And so when I actually talked to a couple of colleagues, and I'm going to name Chris Nezen, he said this eloquently: he's our boy. And what he means to the community is he's a Mount Abe kid who graduated from our school system, went on to fulfill his dream, and is now living it. And that I hope you will consider in allowing him to stay on at Mount Abraham. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I just wanted to add one thing. As I'm sitting here listening, I also feel like we need to point out the fact that not only is Justin liked, he's respected. The same administrator that greets them every morning, knows what their birthday is, you know, is their friend that they go to when they need. He's also the same person who holds them accountable when they mess up. He also sets the bar high for, you know, behavior standards and academic standards, and he pushes them to maintain those at all times. And that's, in my opinion as a parent, respect. They don't just like him, they respect him. And that's huge. I would rather have my kids respect an adult than like them any day. So the respect in my book is so, yes, my kids love him, but they respect him.
Me too.
My name is Janet Fuller, and I'm a mom. I live in Starksboro. I have a daughter currently in school. Her name is Ava. And I'm one of those moms who works out of town, and, you know, I don't have a lot of connections. You know, who do I call? Who do I talk to? Well, Justin is the one teacher or administrator now that I always felt like I could call or email, and he was my go-to guy for like pretty much every single question or concern that I had. And I know that for me it would be a huge loss to have him. He's just so approachable and so friendly and so knowledgeable. And my daughter has food allergies that are just, you know, life-threatening. He's been a big asset with that. And I was listening to that boy, Ezra, I believe his name was, saying what was special, what made Beeman special. Well, Justin makes our Mount Abe special. I don't want to lose that. It really makes me sad because I feel like he's the heart and soul for our kids. That's it.
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes, if any. Yes.
I'm Lisa Dupois. I'm a resident of New Haven. I have a son at Mount Abe. Last year, he was an 8th grader, had a really tough year. Justin was our go-to guy to get him through math. He and Carla Mayo suggested we purchase a program called the ALEX program in order for him to be placed correctly in math for this year. He refused. He didn't like the teacher, so he just refused to do any work whatsoever. And time again, I went to the school and tried to work through the process. My son tried to work through the process, but it was just not going to be a good working relationship. So with Justin and Carla Mayo's assistance, and Justin willing to stay after school so my son could take the initial algebra test, and if he scored an 80 or above in that test, he would have been placed correctly into a math class that he's a very strong math student, just would not work with the teacher. My son scored an 88 in like an hour and 10 minutes doing the test. So for the rest of the year, for the last 2.5 weeks, he went into a HOW lab in the high school level and worked on the ALEX program. By the time he finished 8th grade, he finished that program with a 96, with no one helping him, just working through the program on his own because he was a smart enough math student. But we couldn't get him to work with the math teacher that we had. He unfortunately finished the 8th grade year with a 1 in his math class, but he was placed correctly this year in a math class, and he has got more than a 3 something in that math class this year. If it hadn't been for Justin and Carla, I don't know where. He would be in a math class this year that he would also not be doing well in because he'd be bored, quite frankly. And he's the kind of kid who would get into trouble if he's not motivated. So without Justin, there's going to be some other kids down the road that are going to miss out on opportunities. He's a good fit for Mount Abe.
Thank you.
Yes, hi. My name is Simone Skelly, and I teach at Mount Abe. I'm also a Bristol resident. And I just want to say it's really impossible to overstate Justin's place in that school. His place in the community. He has such a unique personality and skill set that I think he's actually irreplaceable. And I really urge you to figure out what the problem is and why it has not worked out for him. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's going to put us at the end of our time for this public comment. I appreciate you all being respectful and constructive with your comments. At this point, the board is going to move into executive session, and like I said, we're going to leave this room and go to another room for a private, confidential conversation. In order to go into executive session, we do not have to prove premature disadvantage because the particular definition of why we're going in is under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or employment or evaluation of a public officer or employee. And any action that we make regarding this will be in public session when we return back down here to our meeting. So I will entertain a motion to go into executive session and invite Patrick to join us.
So moved.
All right, Krista.
Second.
And Sarah McLean. And we are going to go into executive session at 6:31. Okay, if board members want to bring your...
Just remember to get it after time.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'll call us back into order. Now it's cold. At 7:21. All right. Our next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. So, Jen? Jen?
I'd like to make a motion to pull item item E from the consent agenda for discussion.
Okay. That's Jen. Is there a second to pull item E?
Second.
Sarah?
Sorry.
All right. All those in favor of pulling item E from the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, you may. Jen?
I just have a brief statement I'm going to read. Excuse me for reading.
Could I present the board with a little more information? On Friday, October 26th, I received a letter to rescind the resignation of Justin Bouvier. It was presented to the administration and the board chair, so I'd like to let board members take a look. There's the letter that I received. Jen?
So on October 17, 2018, the MAUSD board chair and administration received a letter of resignation submitted by Justin Bouvier. The letter stated that after much consideration, he had made a difficult choice to resign from his position at Mount Abe, a personal decision due to his unhappiness with his work situation. On October 26, 2018, the board chair and administration received a rescission letter of resignation from Justin Bouvier, citing the formal withdrawal of his 10/17 resignation, stating that upon further reflection, he wished to continue his employment with MAUSD. When the board considers a situation like this, there are several factors that govern our process. We look at our policy for guidance, we consider roles and expectations, we consider facts, not rumors or gossip. Some of these facts are public knowledge and some are private. We have to communicate with the organization and community our decisions, all the while maintaining the confidentiality of information we receive in executive session. As a board, we understand and support our ENDS policies. We are tasked with making decisions and acknowledging that our primary roles as board members is to understand our community's values and to make sure that our organization continues to progress toward our goals. Our actions as trustees have to support our schools in a positive manner. It is with all these factors that the board takes the following action. With the new information presented regarding the rescission of the letter of resignation, the board has no action to take. I move to take no action on the resignation of Justin Bouvier.
Second.
Steve? All right. All those in favor of taking no action on the letter of resignation of Justin Bouvier, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Now we'll move back to the consent agenda. I'm assuming you'll add back in the other letter of resignation that was submitted in that when you make your motion.
Would you like me to make that motion?
I would love it.
So I moved to approve the consent agenda, including item E, the letter of resignation from Suzanne Schmidt.
Second.
All right, Krista. All right, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the adding back in the letter of resignation for Susan Schmidt, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. All right. Now we'll move down to executive limitations monitoring report. Your financial information was included in your packet. If you have any questions, now's the time.
Can I ask really quick who seconded the motion to the second motion?
The consent agenda?
Yeah.
Krista, thank you, Krista.
So Howard, the only question I had on the financial report was how are we doing on the health budget?
On the what budget?
On the health budget.
It's hard to say at this point because we have lack of information. I will say that based on the first 6 months that we have from the last fiscal year and the first few months in this fiscal year, which we only think that this goes through part of July, right? We're about $400,000 in and we budgeted about $700,000. So we have some room to play with. The only thing is, at this point, you have to worry a little bit because it's our responsibility is after everybody pays their deductibles. So the payment of the deductibles for a lot of people have already been done. So it seems like in the later months, we'll be hit more hard with the payments of the insured. And it's hard to predict that because of the problem with the whole issue of future planning and now the subsequent company data path. So, I mean, for me to really predict this, Patrick and I have talked about it, and Cheryl, who's our lead accountant, we've talked about it at great length, and there's just no way of coming up with a number that would give us that information. So.
All right, so for the best of your knowledge, we're hanging in there.
We're hanging in there at this point. We're paying bills, which is good. But, you know, where we'll wind up, we may not know this figure until well after the the December year ends when all the claims finally get processed.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the financial report? Do you have anything you want to? No. Okay. An update on the strategic plan.
So the strategic plan steering committee was actually scheduled to meet last night, but for multiple reasons, the least of which so that people could attend the girls field hockey semifinal game. We did not meet last night, and we did win 2-1. We fought hard. So we're working on finding another meeting date soon with the intent to sort of plan out our collection of feedback on a draft plan at a November in-service day, November 19th. It's the Tuesday, I think, before the Thanksgiving break. So it's nearly ready to receive feedback, and then once feedback's received, the steering committee will sort of process that feedback, make any final changes, and then be able to move forward with that plan. So in the meantime, we'll have received the feedback, and the hope is, and the intention behind the timing of it all, was so that strategic plan can influence budget development for next year. It'll be coming sort of mid to late process in budget development, but not post-budget development. So we'll be using that to plan the work and the budget forward.
So a round date for the draft is when?
So November 19th is when we plan for the draft to be shared more broadly. And we have to the point of the meeting is to really think about the various constituent groups, the ways in which we can get feedback, and to make those plans.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll keep moving on. Next, a discussion around school safety.
So this was a topic that I mentioned briefly at the retreat. It didn't then make it into the September agenda, and there's interest in having this on the agenda for October, so here we are. I shared with you sort of my thoughts about what I think needs to happen from a school safety perspective. Some of those things are in action already. So we are implementing the ALICE training. It is specifically an active shooter training, which is a really hard thing to have to be thinking about training our staff on.
Is that focused across all the schools, because you've got a whole different group of students in elementary schools than you do in the high school, so if it goes at least different training levels, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so it's so right now we're training staff. That sort of the plan is first train staff, then sort of educate and inform parents, and then in the fall begin training students. Just because of the sensitive nature of the topic and wanting to just be respectful and out in front of this before we're training students. And for sure, there's a different approach, a different tact to the training at the secondary level than the elementary level, and really even sixth graders are different from kindergartners. So dialing that training in ways that are sort of respectful for where students are developmentally, and in a way that isn't, the intent is not to frighten, the intent is to prepare, so try and do that in a way that achieves that balance.
Because I've experienced it in the workplace, and the whole concept of the counter is just unnerving.
Very much so.
Which counter?
Counter, basically you come up with an attack scenario with whoever's in lockdown or wherever the situation may be, to try to counter and take out whoever the assailant might be.
As a last resort. And part of the thinking behind this is, so historically the training in schools has been, if there's a violent intruder in your school, active shooter or something else, hide under your desk and get away from windows. And so should that intruder enter your classroom where you're hiding under the desk doing nothing, that's a problem. And so as they've studied active shooter events, they've learned the last thing you want to do when somebody comes into your space looking to do harm is basically lay on the ground and do nothing. So much as the counter is a really hard reality to grasp, it's the preferred approach to sort of lay there and take whatever it is they're looking to dish out.
I just was out of town last weekend and happened to listen to a This American Life podcast that was talking about this specific topic and just about the different schools of thought around these sorts of programs. And I guess Alice and then there's one other that are like the two primary leaders in the nation around this. And one of the things they talked about, they spoke to teachers at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who had been doing ALICE training like within the weeks before they had their awful experience. And they talked about the problem was that they were anticipating an unannounced drill. And does this training include drills that people don't know are going to happen? Because that seemed really problematic. That they didn't know, is this a drill or is this not a drill? And so that was one question I had. And then the other thing that was brought up was that giving people lots of options of how to respond, because if people think there's just one way to respond, but then you're in a situation, your instincts might actually be more appropriate to the situation, and you can't anticipate every scenario.
And that's the idea behind ALICE. So ALICE is an acronym that stands for alert, and so that's the first thing, make known that there's something happening that is dangerous. Lockdown, which is different than sort of the lockdown drill that we practice now. Lockdown in an active shooter event is an enhanced lockdown, like barricade the door. It's not lock it and then hide. It's really take more active steps to prevent people from gaining access. So alert, lockdown, inform, and so it's about providing information. And again, that's different. So the idea is
no codes.
No codes. It's just plain language. There's an active shooter. It's whomever. If you know the person, state their name. They're in this hallway right now. They're moving in this direction. Super crystal clear, so that people can act based on the information that's given and make those decisions for themselves. So alert, lockdown, inform, counter. That's what Kevin was talking about. Should you, if the threat is close by and the decision you make in that space in that time is to lock down and try and barricade, if they get through that barricade, rather than just stand complacent, it's the counter. Throw things, do whatever, and the counter is different for different ages, right? A classroom full of seniors is different than a classroom full of kindergartners in terms of counter. And so talking about what that means, what that looks like, what to do, it's a different approach. And then the ideal, and so they're in this order because it makes a nice acronym, ALICE. The reality is pick from this menu based on the information you're given. So the ideal is evacuate. That's the E in ALICE. And so that's if you get information that the threat is upstairs on the northern end at Beeman, well, if we're sitting in this room, we're getting out. And depending on the layout of the building, getting out could be through the doors, it could be through the windows, it could be whatever it needs to be. And so there's inherent then practice of if the expectation is for kids to leave that space and just get out, like it's not let's leave in a nice orderly line and who's our line leader today, it's get out. People then need to know, where do I go when I get out? And so that's part of the training as well, is knowing where's the relocation site. Everybody knows it, everybody goes there. So in an event, people know what to do.
And this is already in practice, correct?
The trainings are underway right now for staff. We haven't discussed this with students, we haven't trained students, we haven't informed.
My kid has. Lincoln has.
Well, so interestingly, the concept of ALICE was discussed 3 or 4 years ago. And some buildings started doing something with ALICE, other buildings didn't do anything with ALICE.
Okay.
This is a much more consistent and full implementation of the ALICE training with staff. And then a much more consistent full training with students after community engagement and parent information would happen next year.
Right, so all of the administrators at the time were all trained. We were trained for 2 days with emergency first responders. There were about 20 of us probably in a 2-day training. And then what we did beyond that was sort of building specific, like some of the principals, there's a elementary school level book that kind of speaks to what to do, and I'm pretty sure that Tori had something like that. And then some of the other schools thought about, we just didn't have a comprehensive approach to what we were going to do next, but what you're probably referring to are things like being much more explicit in your drill language. So I know some of the schools did start implementing some of those things.
I just know my 6th grader came home and said, they want us to counter. Like,
yeah.
Sarah.
I just, Patrick, Krista, and I went to the VSBA meeting last week, and one of the things, we went to a conference on like what happened in Fairhaven. And one of the speakers there told us about the governor's statewide school safety training conference, which is happening in 2 weeks. And I'm wondering if anybody from our district is going to that, because it seems like that would be valuable.
I don't know that we've heard anything about it at this point.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anybody that's currently planning to attend.
Okay. Seems like a good one.
I've
Krista.
attended in the past, and it's sort of good.
Okay. Krista.
What systems get put in place with ALICE for students on IEPs or who have other needs? And what do we know about the laws around that? Because it seems really important to have really clear plans in place for kids who might not be able to get out of the building without help, who might get really overwhelmed in that sort of situation and flee. So what are we doing to make sure that every kid on an IEP, that there's a plan for those kids, and how to deal with that?
I mean, I think Alice or no Alice, that's an important topic. Because in any situation where the students need to get out of the building, fire drill, for example, we need to have a plan in place about how kids exit the building. And so I do think there are some details that we still need to understand more about. And I think going through the drills and having this training raises awareness for a lot of people and puts us in a better position to ask the right questions about what needs to be in place to help every student. And there's a lot of different scenarios out there about what student needs are. You mentioned from mobility challenges to anxiety issues, and there's a range beyond that. But those are plans that need to be identified and then practiced.
So so right now we're in staff training mode, and then will there be when would that be addressed?
I think that's something that needs to be addressed very soon. It's probably in place in some cases and in others not, but we need to make sure that it's in place for everyone. Because again, we don't know when an event is going to happen that is going to require students to evacuate the building, and we need to make sure we can get everybody out.
And then you said people will know if it's a drill. Is that part of it?
I didn't say that.
Is that the case with this?
There are different schools of thought. We haven't, particularly for Alice, we've not reached any sort of collective commitment, nor have I made a clear directive of every drill is going to be announced or every drill will be unannounced. I think for sure the first drill will be announced. There are pros and cons to announcing every drill.
Aaron? Have you heard any discussions about outsourcing software, etc.? I've been hearing some stuff lately about monitoring social media sites, looking for threats, comments and different word strings that kids or people who might be planning some violence like this might be putting out there on the different Instagram and whatever. Is the state engaging in that? Do we have any plans locally to
I'm not aware of any direction from the state right now regarding any of those kinds of technologies, and we're not pursuing anything in-house. I'm aware they exist. It's not something we've pursued.
I just have one question. So besides these sorts of programs, which are not fail-safe, fail-proof, whatever the word is that I can't think of right now, what information is out there about just even the value of relationship building in schools and adults and kids having connections? Because that seems like a pretty key piece to a lot of this as well, at least for school shootings, and even the forwarding of Fairhaven, the knowledge of that community had about this particular person. So I guess I just would be interested in learning more about and advocating for us to see this as one important but part, not the only part of this for us to think about as a community.
Yeah, I can't cite any specific research, but I think common sense stands that when adults know children well, and at least when a student feels like they have at least one adult that is an advocate for them, adults will pick up on abnormalities in student behavior early on, and hopefully sort of get in front of something like this before it builds to a crisis mode. And that also is not foolproof. Some of these behaviors do come out of left field and are unpredictable. But sometimes there are warning signs, and the more we know about students and the closer we have those relationships.
Do you feel like we currently have those systems in place to the level we should, as much as we're going to dedicate to this?
Do I think the adults in our building make strong relationships with kids? Absolutely, yes. I certainly can't promise you that it's sufficient enough to prevent anything like this from happening.
Anyone else?
Just, it's probably obvious, but I'm assuming the central office is doing their thing around this as well in their space.
We had our training the other day, yesterday. just yesterday. So yes, we are. And I do want to make sure that you notice there are facilities needs as well. In terms of safety, there are some things in place, not in place, that really ought to be in place to give just sort of a basic level of safety and security. Some more controversial than others. It's pretty terrible, isn't it? But for me, the foundation is, I think each school needs to have a fully functioning PA system, so that someone, whoever the person is that's charged with this responsibility, from any room in the building can make an announcement over the PA, or even better, from outside of the facility, make an announcement over the PA. So if part of this is to provide information, if we don't have a way to communicate, that falls apart immediately. And so that has, I think, significant safety implications. I also think about the concept of inform around Alice. And I think cameras in halls and public spaces like that, not in classrooms, is important. And for those cameras to be accessed via some code that are web-based, so we can share the link to those with law enforcement in the event of a crisis, or that we can help manage a crisis from central office and do that remotely. If from central office I can have eyes in the building and be able to communicate through the phone system to everyone, it allows everyone in the building where something's going on to be taking care of themselves and those around them, and not focused on communicating with me or trying to communicate out. So there's a lot still to learn about what are the most effective systems, what are the costs, etc. But I think that's the direction we need to move in. And just some foundational things like ensuring that our locks on the exterior doors function properly, ensuring that our classroom doors can be locked from the inside. I'm looking at a door right there that doesn't have an option to lock from the inside. So threats outside your hall. You're supposed to open your door and go into the hall and lock it with your key and come back in the room. That's problematic. That lock set's probably $300. So multiply that by how many doors are just in this building. You can get a sense of the scope of cost to do this. But I also have a hard time talking cost when we're talking about basic safety needs. So there's a balance, I think, but some things are worth what it'll cost to put in place. So those are some of the kinds of things that are very much on my radar. We do have a new director of facilities and grounds. That's soon to be on his radar. I think it's sort of on his radar now. It will become more on his radar to work to address some of those things.
Alice, did we get money from the state for security purposes?
We did. So collectively, so each school had a few different items that were identified. There might be blinds, could be locks, or a PA system. We did receive $75,000 in grants to help with those, which is very helpful and is a drop in the bucket relative to everything that needs to be done.
All right. We'll move on to our next item. It's an action item, so it will require us to have a motion to discuss. And our action item is to accept the A1N's monitoring report.
I would make the motion to accept the A1N's monitoring report.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Who's second?
Sarah.
All right. All right. You want to discuss? You have any questions? You got the report on Monday at the, Erin.
Sorry, this big stack of paper, my goodness. The question I had is, I had a discussion with Tom, he's the head of, Tom Lermith is the head of, and he said that they were doing some evaluating on the coaching and how that was going so far. And he was preparing a report, I think, for you. When might we get a chance to see that?
That's a good question. So I think we have a meeting scheduled for November 13th for Tom and Elizabeth, who's the co-chair of Anita, to bring what they've collected to a meeting with Katrina and I to talk about some of the feedback around coaching.
And are they getting feedback from all of the schools?
I believe there was a survey created that was intended to go to receive feedback from every school. I don't know to the extent what the participation rate is at each school, but the intent was to gather feedback from every school.
So then would we see that at our November meeting, which would be after the 13th?
Yeah, that could be a possibility. Yep.
Jen? I think it might be, for my purposes, so is this a survey that you've asked Tom to conduct, or this is something that Anita is conducting and then sharing the findings with you?
Anita is conducting and sharing the findings.
So that's information that could be really helpful to us. Is there a version of that we would want to do, a shaping of that, any input? Can we partner on that? Because it would be really helpful, but if it's only asking a set of questions, will they be most helpful to us as we think about the budget? Is there anything? Does it matter?
I think we're entering a conversation about policy governance and what makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for the board to be weighing in and deciding on the coaching model as an effective approach to achieving the ends, starts down, I think, a different path. I think it's worth talking through board role, superintendent role around that. And so that's where it's clearly going to be useful from a means perspective and understanding what's working and not working about our efforts to support core instruction through coaching. My initial reaction, it feels more means than ends, but that's a conversation that is worth having.
I think the reason that I ask it is because I think, and a lot of people are probably going to feel this way, you know, the things that we're in non-compliance about, I see that we have a 5-year time frame on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like 5 years is a long time to wait to pivot if that's necessary. So I guess that's just kind of, you know, I was reading through your report, and obviously as a parent, a concerned parent, I'm thinking 5 years from now, my son's gonna be in Mount Abe, and he's already gonna be behind, in my opinion, because of certain skills that he's lacking that I have to work really hard on with him at home, because he's not being successful in the classroom necessarily. So I guess I kind of am like, gosh, 5 years is a long time to decide if something is working or not. So that's kind of where my comment comes from.
And I get, so my perspective on that is, you know, so we've operated in a very similar fashion for the past several decades to get the results we're getting now. It seems premature on day 43 that we want to see those results do a complete 180. I think it's important to sort of check on things and what's working, what's not, as with a desire to improve and make what we're working to have happen work better. But for me, the concept of 5 years is that's the reality. And you sort of play it out over time. Generally speaking, after making a fairly significant change, you can expect to see an implementation dip. Like you can actually expect to see results decrease slightly before then you start to see a trajectory up. And before we can really know what our trajectory is, we need multiple data points to be able to see that trajectory. So realistically, we're talking about 3, 4, or 5 years at least before we can understand if the changes we're having are making an impact on a systems level. Certainly not on day 43.
Steve. So first, I just wanted to second that. I mean, you're 2 months into this program, so the amount of feedback and how helpful it's going to be is got to be a bit limited.
Not that there isn't room to improve still. To continue to refine and make it work.
Logistics, just getting logistics straight.
Absolutely.
I had a couple of comments. One was brought up by a community member about just around the segregating or the aggregating of data between the free lunch or the economically disadvantaged versus advantaged in that it was done primarily on, one data point rather than across the board. You're probably familiar with the comments, and I was just curious what you might have to offer there.
Yeah, I mean, it's as we've discussed in a couple of different circumstances, the concept of disaggregating data is an interesting one because you can disaggregate in a lot of different ways for a lot of different things. Some more easily than others, some more valid than others. For sure, with NECAP, it was with SBAC, sorry, it was most readily accessible in terms of being able to disaggregate. The groupings were such that the N size was significant enough. Some of the other data points focusing just on one grade level makes it a little bit harder. Certainly if we're disaggregating by school by grade level, it becomes very identifiable. So those are some of the balances. If Katrina has something to offer with disaggregation as well, I think she may have something to add.
Yeah, so yes, you're right, to your point, it would be very helpful to have more disaggregated data. This is one more data set in disaggregation than you've ever had before, so I felt good that at least we got something in there as it related to that. We just literally had a conversation with some of our math leadership folks this afternoon about ways in which we could understand a little bit better the profile of kids who are receiving intensive intervention, and knowing that information was talked about. We left that conversation with, thinking about where are we at a need to know, and basis around confidentiality, and where does that kind of information really impact the interventionists who are working with a student in what they decide to do programmatically. So I think from an internal standpoint, we're having a lot more conversations about looking at kids more holistically. From a reporting out standpoint, as Patrick said, this was the most readily available for the board for right now, but it doesn't mean that we can't explore other assessment tools in the future.
Right, and I thought having some sense, because the way that it's set up, you're seeing how those students perform as a percentage basis of that particular data set, but and I think the information is provided somewhere else, not in this report, about what the percentage of the kids that are actually on that side of the fence. Yes. So what is the percentage of that group you're giving the percentage of? I don't know if you're following me there, but if 75% of the kids in the school, and I'm drawing out a number, if 75% of those kids in the school are on free lunch, then it's a much bigger percentage of the kids that are struggling under the disaggregated information. Mm-hmm. So just having that as part of a precursor to that would be helpful.
As a district, we're about 35% on free lunch. And the concept used to be free or reduced.
Right.
It's just free now. The threshold was changed. So free or not free. So it's reflected in the language that you see.
And if I can throw one more in for you. Part of that also is the core standards are sort of supported by evidence of mainly standardized testing. I'm curious if it's possible to query and provide data on the basic everyday report card. I'm sure kids just get a teacher report on how well they're doing in science. Can that be aggregated some way and just provide the basic teacher perspective rather than the standardized testing perspective on the core subjects?
Part of the efforts, and Katrina can speak to this more, but part of the effort was to look to assessments that all students in the group would take.
No, I understand why you would want to use those data points. Not discouraging using them, but just being able to look at it from the everyday hands-on person's view of the subject.
And I think part of what you're bringing up is another thing that was actually talked about today at our admin team meeting, that we do need to strengthen our locally developed common formative assessment system, which is really useful information to report out on, but even more important is useful information sort of along the way to facilitate meaningful conversations with colleagues about the results we're getting for our students and the actions that are taken or the instructional practices that lead to the outcomes that we want.
Well, that's the whole point of this. The whole point is to create a feedback loop for improvement. So.
And just to add to that a little bit, I would say that my first year in this role, I went there because we were so excited and my predecessor did such a great job of getting the standards-based report card in an electronic system where we could pull some of that information. And I did, and it was sheets and sheets and sheets of what that looked like. And the more questions that I kind of asked about how teachers arrived at their various 1s, 2s, 3s, or 4s, the very different responses I was getting. So I was very nervous about responding or providing that kind of uncalibrated score system that now we've definitely done a lot of work to get into a stronger place, and there's more work to be done. But up until this point, it's pretty tricky. We just became a district, right? So all those mini districts were kind of making their own judgments based on rubrics that were developed, which was great, but different rubrics maybe from school to school.
Krista.
So I know that adding in equity to the ends policy was something that happened pretty recently, and I know in the strategic plan there's a whole group dedicated to that. And I think right now what's provided just with that one piece of disaggregated data is just barely scratching the surface of information we would want, right? I mean, it just seems like we've got to have other ways to know if what we're offering students is equitable. And do you guys have thoughts? Do you have thoughts about that? I mean, and I wonder, you know, it's like I can only imagine how much time it takes to put this together, and it's hard in a way to offer this feedback after it's been put together and be like, oh, it would have been great if you had this or this. And I don't know, but I just think that there are so many different pieces of what we offer, and they are not available to all students. And if we don't know and we're not identifying it, that's really problematic. And as a board, we need to be able to see that. So where in this report could we see that reflected?
Yeah, I mean, I do think in terms of the equity piece, the one place we can look to in here is that disaggregated data for students on free lunch specific to SBAC. And I do think it is just a beginning. I think we do need to continue to look for inequities or equity. I don't think we're looking for inequities, but we want to make sure that we're doing our part to move away from inequities. I think what would be important is to have greater clarity about what is the information we want to have, because there are literally there's 100 different things we could look at to identify whether or not there are inequities.
So do you think that, is it because I know, just being on that steering committee, the equity team did a ton of work around that, do you see some of those action items informing this?
Absolutely. So the equity action team created some pretty specific measurable objectives, and I think those measures for that team and the other 3 teams from the strategic plan need to make their way into this ends monitoring report in future.
Sir.
And in the plan to become compliant, so what you're saying here is basically like once we get the strategic plan, then we will see like measurable targets and get a little bit more of an idea of how we're going to reach towards being compliant with our ends.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're also not, because it's been such a short time period, we're not going to give too much weight to the feedback that we get from the group that's collecting the data about in the schools about this new coaching interventionist model.
I wouldn't say that we're not going to give it weight. I would say there's not much, I think, that would convince me that after 43 days we should abandon the whole idea. I'm very open to ideas on how to make it work better. And that, I think that to me is the focus.
Will those ideas that you have about how to make it better be considered when, and this is more of a budgetary conversation, be considered when you're working on the budget?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, as the strategic plan evolves and as we think about, and I've been asking administrators a lot to be thinking about what do we see as needs as we move into next year, because we're beginning the budget building process. And we talked today about really trying to think through meaningful ways to engage staff to hear some feedback, to inform how we build the budget. And so administrators are thinking about how we might do that. And we meet again next week, and we're going to continue that conversation.
Allison. So I'm wondering where you're getting this 43 days from, because this year's budget was coaches and interventionists. Last year's budget was coaches and interventionists, and the year before included coaches and interventionists. So why are we just saying we've only been implementing this for 43 days and that's the only, and I'm oversimplifying, but that's the only data that we have and we shouldn't throw it out? Seems to me like we've been working on this for a while, and it's taken time to get things in place and all of that, but it seems like there's more to it than just whatever Wednesday we started school this year. So.
If I may, you are absolutely right, and I'm so glad that you said that, because I keep saying that over and over, that there has been coaching and intervention in this district forever. My predecessor's nodding. So there, for some people, what we're doing isn't really new. It's just that it's collective now, right? So it's the whole district, and by focusing on ensuring that the personnel who had been providing some coaching and some intervention can do one of each is new. And sharing staff between the small schools is really new. And implementing intervention blocks where kids are getting their intervention purely in that block versus being pulled out of something else to get that support is new. There are so many things that are new, and we are implementing them built on things that have had success in the last at least 3 years, but certainly over many other years, in places that have never had it before. Having interventionists here who are purely for literacy, and here, Mount Abe, so used to being at Mount Abe with these meetings, is relatively new within a learning commons models, and that had been started the year before last. So there's so many examples of bits and pieces that we for years have been trying to focus on building as something that could be sustainable and have capacity, where we can train people. All the coaches are actually going to yet another training together this month, which is very exciting as well. And there are so many pockets of success that we are trying to also capture from people while the association is collecting answers to their 6 questions. We say 42 days because we've been a district officially for 42 days, and so the changes that we're making are more systemic than they've ever been before. The other thing I just want to say that I think I've said a lot, and I know it's not lost on people in this room, is that we've been trying to do some of these changes in the absence of direction. So we haven't had the strategic plan to lead our way. We haven't been able to put those measurable targets out front yet, which is what the coaches are supposed to be helping teachers to attain. So by not having that sort of guiding light, North Star plan, all we're focusing on is the support for what? So that there's been a cart before the horse that I think has made it bumpy as a start for this school year. That part was my soapbox. Thank
you. Krista. Where do we see personalized learning in here? Because that's a pretty key piece to what we're moving toward. And I know we're talking about core subjects through flexible pathways, which I assume, does that mean is that code word for personalized learning?
Flexible pathways is very much connected to personalized learning, yes.
Right. So how do we monitor that? How that?
The interpretation doesn't specifically speak to personalized learning. It speaks to transferable skills, so a little bit of a broader base. So how many kids are pursuing a personal interest is an attempt at giving you some of that information. We will be at a place, I think, in the future where we can speak more eloquently to personalized learning plans and goals that students, at least grades 7 through 12, are setting for themselves, but we're still very much in the beginning stages of those.
So right now it's mostly in extracurricular.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, personal interest, but not built within the curriculum.
Yeah, I think we would just need to tease out back at the interpretation level, what might be some of those possible evidence pieces that folks have in mind when they hear personalized learning. We would want numbers about how many kids are taking a virtual high school class, or dual enrollment, or pursuing a topic through the PL department. So that kind of feedback we would need to talk about. And we didn't when we built the interpretation.
Allison? On that, would you look at the Hannaford Center as part of the, I'm assuming, as part of, not just dual enrollment, but also the things that the kids do through the Hannaford Center?
Yeah.
Okay.
So broadening that, how are they pursuing personal interests beyond what I grabbed, which was really more in the extracurricular realm.
And then the class of 2020 is the first class to have only the proficiency-based report card, correct? But that doesn't pull in the personalized learning piece in terms of reporting that the current 11th graders are doing a personalized learning plan and they're moving along in it, or that kind of thing. It's more the proficiency-based report card?
We've definitely been working on proficiencies more deeply than what we would be prepared, I think, to report on around PLPs, but I hope that would change. And we can speak more to it as time goes on. Literally, I think there's been fits and starts around the actual PLPs themselves. As you know, we've certainly had great success in personalization in this district for a long time, but to try to expand some of that experience to all kids has had its sort of starts and stops. So I think I'd be speaking out of turn if I predicted where we might be a year from now.
And I also think it's important to recognize, thinking about the concept of personalization is really woven throughout the strategic plan. So as we work to articulate some objectives through the strategic plan, the measures of which would be included in this, I think we'll start to see more evidence of what's happening for personalization for students.
Question. Saw that coffee before the meeting. Where in here do we see how students on IEPs are doing? Is that something that you are able to provide, Susan? We've talked many board meetings about how to better evaluate how students who are receiving special education services are doing.
We haven't disaggregated that data, and in some cases it would be difficult because our school populations are so small, it starts to get identifiable. But it has certainly always been on my radar about the performance rates of kids with disabilities in our district and nationally. So it's definitely become an area that Katrina was talking about, sort of the collective approach to the work. That's definitely a conversation we've been engaging in with the special education center for the last couple of years, and actually talking about aligning some of our professional goals towards that and setting high standards. We know the research is clear that just simply by setting high expectations for kids with disabilities, you can have, all kids, but kids with disabilities in particular, you can have tremendous outcomes.
So is there a way, though, without disaggregating or providing confidential or identifiable information to let the board know how well we're serving kids receiving special education services?
And certainly pull it out, or there's statement data as well. Yeah, we can certainly pull it out.
So when we are asking about these things, how does that get captured for the next time?
Well, I think it will be captured. I noticed Steve had his worksheet, so when we do our official board response, if there's a theme that seems to resonate, that's the time to capture it in our board response.
Okay, that's right. You told me that last time.
So.
And to me, that's a critical piece, because it's really important that I'm taking direction from the board as a whole, because there's lots of different ideas about what could be, and rather than try to field all the different desires and ideas from individuals, to pick up on those themes and identify as a board what direction do you want to see is really important. And the direction can be fix it for next time, or take it back and fix it now. depending on what themes are emerging and what you want to see done as a board.
So we discuss, and then we get to that point of
Trying to,
themes.
yes. Steve?
I was trying to take a look at this from perfectly good vantage point in my part, which is a complete newbie layman kind of thing. Although I looked at it once last year, I didn't really feel like I had enough time with the whole topic to really get into it. But just trying to look at it from a brand new perspective, grab the ends policy out, grab the report, and try to mesh them together to see how well they were doing together. I struggled with just trying to follow some of how the interpretation kind of melded things and trying to pull that apart and pigeonhole each one of them with a topic on the ends policy just as an exercise, just to see if I could do it. A little bit of that, I think, would help if some of just the basic numbering system were kind of scattered around in more consistent fashion, just saying, this is the evidence for A 1.2. This is the evidence for A 1.3. So I don't have to kind of make up my mind what I think you're saying about the HART program and whether it goes in that bucket or whether it goes in this bucket. So that's just kind of a minor comment. But in light of that, I was also thinking, when I was trying to sort of look at the report card topics that were provided as evidence, mostly around transferable skills, and thinking about the life and career skills and the learning and innovation skills that are listed as the ends, whether it would make some sense to maybe tailor some of the reporting, either from the teachers or maybe even from the students themselves, directly to the ends bullet points. For instance, students view themselves as valuable contributing citizens participating actively in the community. How you provide evidence of that is really a personal thing coming from the student. Potentially there could be a little student survey sent around, and that could actually be aggregated, and some of these they not only talk about how they feel about themselves, but how they feel about their peers in a completely anonymous fashion, but that might actually give you a bullet point directly towards some of these end pieces. And the teacher's view of the same thing, and that sort of goes back to the, is it possible to use some of the report cards directly as core? Some of the report card questions seem to almost get to the ends policy bullet point, but if they were more tailored to it, maybe they would be a direct correlation as evidence. So.
If I could speak to the student voice piece, so the Every Student Succeeds Act does have a requirement, the federal regs, about a school climate survey that they define for students as capturing just what you're talking about. Do I have an opportunity to pursue my own learning? If there's a standardized test that's being, or assessment that's being, I'd rather call it survey, developed right now, and I heard Friday, we had heard that it was something that was going to be piloted. We were going to need to be piloting in our schools this spring, but I heard on Friday that it won't be until the 19-20 school year. Mm-hmm. So we have had other tools that we've used. We've used the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. We definitely used it when we met as an action team for the social emotional learning group that I was a part of for the strategic plan. So we pulled a lot of those student voice survey things that we've done in the past to help inform our building of the objectives. I paused on reporting out on some of those here in light of the work that's coming to us from this group, from the state. Not an excuse, we're still doing a lot internally with student voice and surveys and that sort of thing, but from a calibrated, standardized, making sure we're giving it in a safe environment, making sure we're getting a good sample size of responses from kids.
Right.
We're not there right now.
No, I know how hard it is to conduct a survey.
Yeah.
Sarah?
I would just like to echo what she was saying. I think that student voice is imperative in order to really know where we're landing in compliance or non-compliance with these with the ends, because the ends are, some of them are they're big picture items, and depending on how you look at it, you could find your way on either end of that extreme of whether you're compliant or non-compliant or partially compliant. I don't even know if that's an option. But the student voice is definitely, I'd love to see a good sampling.
Yeah, do we do a graduate exit survey, customer satisfaction survey?
Yeah. You don't want to do it as they graduate. I'm done.
I want to give an opportunity to anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask any questions. Andrew or Sarah or Liz, I don't know if you have any comments. I want to give you an opportunity to. No? Amy? Jen?
I actually don't think I've asked any questions of Ends report yet, so it's
Come
uncommon. I'm curious, in light of your finding of non-compliance, I like hearing you talk about how we can expect to see this strategic plan kind of driving some of the activities. Can you talk about how that might affect our discussions about the budget, the fact that we're currently non-compliant with the Ends?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's related to the non-compliance on the ends. It's more directly connected to the strategic plan. So as that strategic plan gets some feedback and we have some clarity of direction and we know what we want to try to achieve in year one of the strategic plan, as part of our plan to move toward compliance with the ends, it's more the strategic plan that will drive what I think the budgetary impact or decisions would be than necessarily this report. Because that's the means, and when we're budgeting to sort of provide the means to achieve the ends. Mm-hmm. This is the result of our efforts, and we need to change our efforts to get different results. And changing our efforts has the budgetary impact, and the changing our efforts is driven by what we're saying we're going to do in the strategic plan.
And I realize you already gave an update about the strategic plan tonight, but do you expect that we'll be able to actually consider that input for this budget cycle? Because that's imminent, right?
We have to. The reason this year isn't year one of the strategic plan is because we didn't get the plan developed enough at budget building time last year. And we made decisions absent the strategic plan for this year, given the circumstances we found ourselves in, reducing spending by $1 million, not wanting to do less of the same stuff and cross our fingers and hope for different results, etc. Those were systems changes that position us well to have support to achieve this strategic plan. And now we actually have a strategic plan that needs to drive our work for next year and our budget for next year. And I wish I had it a month ago. I don't. But I'll take it in a few weeks if that's when I can get it and it's not too late.
My only suggestion on that was that it might be helpful to have sort of a timelines in here of that topic, just as a record, kind of, we're in draft form in November and we'll be using it to form next year's budget.
Around the strategic plan specifically? Mm-hmm. And that was hard for me too, I forget, it might have been you, Aaron, that was talking about 5 years being a long time. Mm-hmm. Susan and Howard and Katrina can attest to my desire to affect change more rapidly than that. Are they laughing over there now? Yeah, a little bit. Okay. Completely agree. But we're talking about the need for systems change, and systems change doesn't happen quickly. And that's why, much as I struggled to say 5 years, I can't imagine a scenario where I can comfortably report compliance in less than 5 years.
You said the average term of a superintendent's 3. Are you going to be here? See ya.
I sure would like to be.
We should probably start counting the gray hair.
I think a 5-year plan is so typical for any organization to gauge themselves, but you gotta keep in mind, and it's not said specifically, but I'm sure we're gonna have annual or semi-annual updates to that plan anyway. So I mean, it's not like come back in 5 years.
Oh, exactly.
There's gonna be.
You're gonna have this report every year, and we'll continue to refine this and.
Yeah, there's gonna be review and correction frequently within that 5-year period.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, was that we make sure we have the right probes in place to know way before 5 years is out if it's completely off the rails, and are these the right ones, or,
Yes.
you know.
Are we on the right track? Yeah. And again, you know, the jury's still out if the decisions we've made, that I've made, are the right decisions to improve outcomes for kids. I'm confident they are right now. Time will tell. Where I can sleep easy at night is knowing it's not doing the same stuff that's gotten us the results that we're not happy with, and just continuing down that path. To me, it feels almost unethical to do that. Other professions, businesses that are operating at the proficiencies that we are right now certainly can't continue to operate the way they've always operated. Doctors can't get the results that we get and continue doing what they're doing. I feel the same sort of ethical and moral obligation to try something different in pursuit of improving outcomes. And get 100 educators in the room and ask them what they think we ought to do to improve outcomes for kids. You might get 100 different ideas. We can't do 100 different ideas. We need to do a few and try to do them really well and try to choose ones that will be really impactful. Despite how big a change it makes, it's in pursuit of what is really our purpose, which is to improve outcomes. And you can see from this result, from this report, that I think we do a pretty good job in terms of the transferable skills, and there's evidence to suggest that we're doing some great things there. And there's a lot of room to grow in terms of the academic performance of our students. Both are really important, and we've put a lot of emphasis into the transferable skills aspect, and you can see the results. We need to start really thinking about how to operate differently to achieve the academic results that need to match those.
Allison, I'd just like to say thank you to Katrina and her team for putting this together. It's very helpful and greatly appreciated. And I know the amount of work that went into doing this, and you probably already have started on this year, so.
And I want to echo that, and it's true, you can't imagine. I have a decent sense of the amount of work. It is a tremendous amount of work to pull the data together. It has actually, it did last year, continued this year. It highlights the need to create some systems for data collection, because what you can get out of data is only as good as what you put in. And it highlights some things that we need to do differently about what we put into our systems for data collection, so that we can draw from those the information that we really want. The really hard part is to draw information from a system that doesn't exist in the system, and you kind of have to create it first and then be able to draw it. And I would say we find ourselves in that position too frequently, so we have some work to do there.
So the local Vermont school board meeting was down in Otter Valley. The Secretary of Education talked, and he was all over that.
Yes.
And is there any evidence that something's going to come about?
I think part of the evidence is that he's all over it.
Too early to tell.
They're very clearly, there's definitely some pressure, which we are not immune to, for school districts to upload information into this statewide longitudinal data system, the SLDS that he's referring to. That is something that, as I understand, has been in the works for 5 or 6 or 7 years at the state level, maybe more. Nancy's nodding her head. There's been talk about this statewide system for a long time. A lot of districts have put off building something separate in anticipation of this. I think the Secretary recognizes that and is committed to, like, let's get this done and move on. And I think that's an indication that something's going to happen. It's not clear to me yet what it's going to be like, how effective it is, how useful it is. And I think we'll know soon. Do you have any more specifics about dates when we can expect
No, I mean,
something shared or usable?
At my regional training on Friday, again, there was some echoing from the team. The secretary wasn't there, but he is I've known him for a very long time. He is a techie by trade, so I can see where he wants to grab this one and probably really make something happen with it because he can see it. But there's systems, there's a lot of different staff at the agency who are focused on different things. So bringing them together, I think the school climate survey that I mentioned is an example of them saying, okay, if we need to be focusing on the LDS, then some things have to come off the plate right now. Part of the reason why you don't have the SAT data from last year, I'm told, from a gentleman at the agency, is because of this reshift in focus to have this longitudinal data system up and running. So I think I'm not getting any clear dates. They wanted everything August 15th, and then they weren't ready for us until September 15th, and then we're threatened a week ago, where's all your stuff? Not just us, as a state. So I think it's a little, I think something's gonna happen, which is exciting, but I don't know what.
Yeah.
Allison. And I'll just add to that, the legislature has a very good habit of throwing things at school districts and the Agency of Education in terms of things that they want to have happen. So there's this quality education standards and the pilot project and all of that. It takes resources and people to do that, and people that could be working on that database get pulled in to do something else. So we just get so much jello thrown at us that we're almost lucky that we have anything. We're just constantly playing catch up, and it's unreal. So maybe with a new Secretary of Education, I don't know, maybe can help put the brakes on something. But I think that has a lot to do with it too. There's so many initiatives that get thrown at one agency to take care of that you have to prioritize.
And part of the work that we do is to sort of hear all of that and absorb all that information from the state level and connect it to the work we're doing, rather than have it stand as something on its own that feels disconnected to the work. So writing our continuous improvement plan connected to what we knew at the time, at least, of the strategic plan, to try and have everything feel like it's working cohesively toward a common end, and not feel like we're juggling lots of different priorities, and having different people sort of monitor that.
Can I make a motion to bring this to a vote? Because we're already a half an hour past.
We don't need a motion. If everybody has had a chance to speak, we can move forward. So if you will notice, I tried to get the language on the worksheet to reflect the questions asked on the official board response to help with our process, and now I've lost my folder. Here it is, with my official board response. Okay, so I captured a few themes as people were talking, and I guess we need to decide whether they're themes as a whole board that we agree with, or and want them added into the comments, so we can have this on our response form. I heard a piece about personalized learning evidence being included more distinctly. Is that something that the board values and would like placed in their comments? Sure. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Also, more information around students on IEPs was brought up. Is that? I heard a piece about a student voice sampling included in the evidence.
How about the structure and format of the report aligning more with the ends as they're written? Where people
Not that the current format is not greatly appreciated.
I'm interpreting that to mean the numbering system so you can go
Back and forth, yes.
I got this.
No,
Two out of four, or come to two.
The readability and the color of the fonts is, it's very nice and easy to read. That's,
Yes. And then there was mention of including the timeline with the strategic plan, including some information about the timeline with the strategic plan in the report.
Compliance or
It-
right, yes, as a part of the compliance.
So yeah, it was more the plan, I think, was,
Just a status of the strategic plan along with the compliance statement. So you sort of could see the two together as a record of the discussion.
what do people think?
I'm confused about. We have to have an opinion, right?
Okay. That one's not going anywhere.
The notion of timeline and the strategic plan is sensitive for me. Because I've had
Don't
lots
say
of
those
different
two words
timelines
together.
for the strategic plan and we haven't hit any of them yet.
Not comfortable putting it in.
Is there anything else that I missed? Because I was trying to capture it the best I could. Did anybody else have a point that they raised that I don't?
Just if it was somehow possible to include some basic, the basic report card on the core subjects, instead of just relying on the standardized testing as evidence for the core subjects.
So including report card information
Like
as
the-
part of the evidence as well?
How do the teachers all feel that the students are all doing on math, based on their report card reporting?
I guess I personally
If it's
would
possible, I'm not even
I
sure.
personally would feel comfortable writing something, and this is just my opinion, which is the same as you having your opinion, right? But my opinion is, I would rather have our recommendation say something more broad, that we would suggest that the administration continue to find additional sources and measures, because I know I've seen reports in the past with the report card data that was really difficult to make sense of. So I would trust the judgment if that's, maybe there's something else, but so to continue to look for additional measures, you know, or something.
And I think what I'm hearing is local assessment data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Whether it's a report card or something else.
Obviously, with somebody's reporting that somebody's doing either poorly or good at math locally, there should be some way to aggregate it, and maybe it's because all the formats of these cards have all been all over the map, and there's not something that you can just easily put together, and maybe that's an aspiration.
Focus on math, I've got you covered for next year. Start picking on me about social studies and science, it's gonna be a while. But we could give a sample of some kind, I think. But you're talking about for next report, right? Yeah. Phew.
Yeah, and some of that comes from just some of the feedback I've heard about the testing in general, just that how invested the kids are actually in the testing, and the local information may be more helpful.
So is that something you're all, so more sampling of local information included? Is that it? Does that cover it?
And making use of stuff that's already being measured locally.
Not new stuff to me.
Let's not add more, let's not add more.
Right.
But we are going to have more measures. I mean,
You don't
it's
want
already,
the board wants us to?
it's,
I don't want it to be the board said we have to have new tests.
No.
And more
No.
Mom, it's
So
not your
this is
fault.
just querying what's already out there.
the measurable objectives in the strategic plan will require us to have different assessments than we currently have.
And the parent-teacher conferences, kind of, I mean, I just had mine this morning, was that long ago? There are more local assessments happening in each grade and for each child's progression. So I don't know if all of those are the same across all of the schools.
That's the hard
But-
part. That's the common piece that.
Yeah, because that's good data to have, because we all have the same conversation with our teachers, pretty much, I would, in some fashion. But that's one of the things I'm thinking about would be I don't know what the names of the little tiny tests are that they keep giving the kids, but they're more local, not SBAC or kneecap. It's, more and more specific to what the kids are learning at the time.
Okay.
And I don't know if we decided, or you were saying, Katrina, that is it possible to disaggregate any of those more local assessments by socioeconomic status or?
Probably.
Well, we can throw it out there as an aspiration.
Poor Katrina.
Well, and part of this, and I think I alluded to this earlier, to achieve some of this means building things differently than we have built them in the past. So we need to be able to input the information that we want to collect. So if we are building common formative assessments and we are collecting the results from those assessments, we need to collect them in a way that identifies students' SES status to be able to disaggregate, and student IEP status, and all those different ways in which we want to disaggregate as we're building it. To go back retroactively and pull out lists of names of kids and all that for various assessments for 1,300 students, 1,400 students becomes complicated. And then to make sure that it's only for things that are common across schools, because it can't be Mrs. So-and-so's class in fifth grade at Robinson gives these results, but it's a different assessment for the fifth graders at Bristol.
Right. I mean, I think, I think about my own child's experience with a standardized test versus a local assessment, and that picture is really different. And so for her, equity is about, learning disability. It's not about socioeconomic status. And I think that's sort of the part of it for me, is understanding, is it this standardized test that's the problem, or is it that we're just not getting at, in either way, what this kid needs to succeed?
And part of what we're talking about here was also a conversation of today's meeting, which was we don't want to put all of our eggs in the basket of any one assessment.
Right.
We need to have multiple assessments that we're looking at, and we look at the preponderance of evidence to suggest how we're doing.
Exactly.
It's not just SBAC, but SBAC is valid and something that we pay attention to in addition to other things.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving along. So, the next question for you is, based on the information provided, does the board find that the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable? Yeah, up or down?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Does the board find that the data demonstrates the accomplishment of this interpretation?
No.
It states that it does.
Right, we're not compliant, so we're saying it
Yeah.
doesn't, right?
Okay.
Am I reading that right?
So, no. All right. All right, so your motion is to accept the A1N's monitoring report. All those in favor of a...
So we accept it even if it's not compliant?
Yes,
Yeah.
because the when there's non-compliance, if there's a plan about how we're gonna get there, that's what helps progress us forward.
Gotcha.
So our other choice would be to not accept the monitoring report and request for revisions, right? But it wouldn't be because it's not compliant, it's because we don't feel that the data that's included in it is sufficient.
Right. For example, that you have suggestions about what could improve this report, you could say, and make those revisions and bring it back to me next month. And I would have to work to talk Katrina off a ledge. And we'd have to stop doing a lot of other things in the meantime. But you could direct me to do that, or you could say, these are the changes we're looking for the next monitoring report, which would be next fall.
I'll say for my part, that's not what my expectation was in the review. I can see this as a boatload of work, and if it could be a continuous process of improvement, then hopefully look forward to what's next.
And the board could ask, hey, check back in with us and let us know how it's going. Just, it doesn't have to be a full report, but check back in with us and let us know how it's going and set a time, kind of thing. All right.
I guess I'd like to suggest, I think it might be valuable, and maybe we can add it to our work plan, if that's the right thing to do, to re-look at the interpretation ahead of the report for next year, because I think that the piece that feels to me like we really want to make sure it gets more focus next year is the equity piece, because there's a lot of characteristics in there. I mean, the IEP is the one that I've seen data on before that we don't see addressed, but there's a whole lot of other stuff in there too. So it may be, you know, I realize it's a lot easier to think ahead about what data would be good to have, so maybe we should put that on our work plan while also accepting this report, but supporting that work for the future.
And just to remind that we do have a strategic plan that has an area that's focusing on equity with systems not yet built, to first identify what we mean by equity as a system, and then to already have the systems in place by which to measure and then collect. So this year has already started, and the report that I would build for next October is based on this year. So just to keep that in mind.
Well, the key is to evaluate the strategic plan, which is sort of, I mean, that will, what we want to see in the next end reports, and it's independent of what we're talking about today without having the knowledge of the strategic plan. So.
And the reality is if we recall the way the plan was developed, it began with creating a vision. And that was work this board did 2 Novembers ago. I mean, that's how far back this work began, creating a vision, sort of creating a mission, but recognizing that sort of the preamble to the ends that had already been created was really, in essence, a mission statement. And so we formally accepted that as the mission statement, and then you already had the ends. So for the board to set the vision, mission, and ends was a critical piece to this. The strategic plan is the plan by which I'm saying we will move to achieve those ends and that mission and that vision set by the board. And we engaged in that strategic planning process very collaboratively, involving 50-some people, from community members to students to board members, parents, teachers, administrators, etc., to collectively build our plan to achieve those ends and that mission and that vision. Which is why it is the plan to bring us to compliance.
Jen?
I do want to be clear, though, that based on policy governance, we don't monitor the strategic plan. The strategic plan might be how you get there, but we monitor the ends, and our ends policy specifically has requirements related to equity. So while I'm super excited that the strategic plan will be helping us to build out those systems, I don't think we can just say, well, I guess we won't see if we're doing that for 2 years until those systems are in place. Like, so I am going to ask you next year questions about it, and I do hope that we have some way of addressing it, even if it will be even better in the following year.
Yep.
I do think it's important.
And I think the part of my thinking with that was perhaps the interpretation, for sure the data that you're seeing will reflect the objectives in the strategic plan, a quarter of which are about equity. So inherent in the work of moving to an ends monitoring report that reflects our progress on the strategic plan and achieving the ends, we're going to see more information about what it is that you want to see more information about. So they're all taking us to that same place that we want to be.
Plus, I think anytime you're in non-compliance, I mean, no, our job isn't to monitor the ends, the means, excuse me, but when you're in non-compliance, at some point, you kind of have to look under the hood a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, at least see what the goal is for the corrective measure.
Exactly.
All right. So, the motion on the table is to accept the A1 ends monitoring report. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that one passes. Down to board management and governance, which are A3 and A4, an update on the community engagement committee. I don't know, I had a problem sending the information, so if anybody needs a hard copy of the information about the minutes and the compiled information from the meeting, it's here. Does anybody need it? What? Oh, this one?
From the community engagement.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, I tried to send out a document last night from Krista, you sent me, and some people didn't get it, so I tried again. Maybe you got it?
Do you, Krista and Jen,
Yeah, so
Andrew,
I guess,
you want
I
to
mean,
speak to it?
you know, it was I thought the event went really well. Thanks to everyone for coming. We had a chance to sort of go through all the data that we received from everybody that participated, and that's all in that report. And our plan was to try to pull that together quickly for the board and for Patrick, and then to share it out with the whole community, people who were there and who weren't, by next week. So that is what we'll be working on next, and we'll have another meeting also within our committee to figure out how to move forward. So we have a proposal from Sue McCormick to work with us over the course of a year. So I think that's something we'll probably bring to the board to see if we'd like to do that work with her. And we have topic ideas from community members and lots more that we need to chew on and come up with. I'm a little crispy, so I'm sure there's more I should be saying, but it's all there and it's late, so.
I know, I personally had so much energy coming out of that community forum that I wish that it was not so late.
Right now, I know.
Exhausted from everything we've been covering. I don't feel like we're doing it justice, but.
And thank you for organizing it and putting it on and getting us to a place where we were able to hold it.
Well, is it possible to earmark some time for next month to go into this a little more?
We can certainly put it on the agenda again.
Yeah,
because we'll have the committee update and we
Right,
can look
we will
again.
have met and we'll probably have some more ideas about what's next.
Right. So, okay.
Well, and also talk more about the advisory councils. I think we should start talking about that seriously.
And I would really encourage everyone, if you didn't get a chance to do it from when it got sent out last night, like, do take the time to read through the comments that we got. I know we all got to be part of the conversation as well, but it is really interesting to see the feedback, and I know I'm going to be keeping it in my mind as we start talking about budgets. So that was the goal.
Okay, I'm gonna keep moving along. So, legislative update from VSBA? There is no update. That's the update. And next is an action item along the career change incentive, and I'm just thinking we could have worded that better. So the actual action would probably be to accept the superintendent's recommendation concerning the career change incentive, and then we can discuss it.
So this is usually the time of year when the board considers whether or not to offer the option in the contract for a career change incentive. It's typically used as a tool when the board sees a need to make staffing adjustments.
Do we want to make a motion?
Yeah, we do.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think that
You didn't have my recommendation yet, though, so you didn't know how to act on my
Right.
recommendation.
we can't make a meaningful motion until we know what the recommendation is, but.
I can just get right to the recommendation if you want it next time.
Okay.
My recommendation is not to offer the career change incentive this year.
Okay. Okay,
Now we make
so
a
now we
motion.
need a motion
Make a motion.
to accept the superintendent's recommendation.
To not offer the
Yeah.
career change incentive this year.
To not, so that's Amy. All right, is there a second?
Second.
Aaron?
Sure. I heard your voice
Aaron,
right
yeah, it was. All right, now you can discuss it. No.
So the career change incentive is intended to be a tool for the board to use to help generate attrition in times when we feel there's going to be a need to reduce staffing. I don't anticipate right now the need to reduce staffing to meet our budget for next year. So I don't think it's necessary to offer that as a tool.
And as with all the changes with coaches and interventionists and all that, we're kind of leveled out and
Yeah, I think
good staff.
if you recall, part of the conversation last year was a recognition that there's a lot of conversation at the state level last year around staffing levels and staff-student ratios. There's currently a task force meeting right now that's charged with generating a report in December about staff-student ratios. So reflecting on every sort of the combination of events that we found ourselves working through last year, we made some significant changes in staffing, recognizing that perhaps the approach of making significant change at once rather than somewhat significant change year after year after year may be the better way and be healthier for the organization in the long run. So we made a lot of changes that I think brought our staffing down to a level that I'm estimating will be acceptable based on the recommendation that comes out of this group. Hard to know until that work is done. But I have no indication right now that we need to look for another significant reduction in staff, because I think we did the hard work last year. So that's the justification for not thinking that we need this tool now.
Does it make some sense to think about accepting that recommendation after we have our first budget discussion?
Perhaps,
Timeline
but the timeline
happens.
doesn't really allow for that. Unfortunately, our budget timeline and career change timeline don't
You
work.
have to let them
I think
know by November 15th.
1st, 15th, something like that,
Alright, so-
before the November meeting.
Okay.
There's a whole lot of timeline around budget that doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
It's just our reality.
Allison?
Do you have a sense of where we are in terms of our student to staff ratio that the governor wanted us to head toward? Where do we stand? Kind of an estimate based on what we did last year in terms of the budget.
I haven't done that analysis with the changes that we've made for this year relative to what the governor was talking about last time, in particular, in part because there's a much more in-depth look at that happening right now. So to do the work to find that comparison now and then to find that it's defined differently from this other group didn't seem like it was necessary. But certainly part of the information that gets uploaded into this statewide longitudinal data system are staffing levels. So there's some of that assessment happening, I think, as part of this work. So again, I think I'm sort of taking the approach of let's see what comes about from this group and then respond based on what we see from that.
Do you think we'll know that by the November meeting?
No, there's a December deadline. I forget when in December for this task force. Maybe there'll be something that comes out ahead of time that gives us some indication as to where it's going. But I haven't heard that that's going to happen.
But you feel confident that we are in a place where we won't be hopefully penalized if they decide to do something along those lines.
Exactly. I feel like
those ratios.
We did the hard work last year to get us into a decent place, and if we have to make changes, those changes won't be anywhere near as significant as they would have been had we not done the work that we did in building this year's budget.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All those in favor of accepting the superintendent's recommendation not to offer the career change incentive for the 2020 FY20, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. All right. Next action item is student reps on our school board.
Good.
I'd like to make a motion to table the discussion of student reps on the school board due to the time in the evening and the number of items still on the agenda.
And E.
And
I don't know if I can do them both. Can I do them both in one motion?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, Shauna, so my motion is for items D and E.
So Jenna's table till November? Is that what you're?
Yes.
I second it.
Okay, Andrew seconds. All right, all those in favor of tabling item D and E until the new November agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. All right.
You may have heard we've struggled with healthcare. And so we, Howard, Bobby Joe, and I have been meeting with and talking through and working with the union to, rather than just commiserate, because this doesn't only impact people who are members of the teachers union. It impacts everyone in our organization who uses their healthcare. And some board members. So rather than just commiserate, really wanted to think about what can we do about this? How can we improve the situation that we find ourselves in? And so in doing some digging, we believe there's a real potential if we were to return to our previous third-party administrator, which is ABS, that we had for 6 years, I think, prior to making the change to the new plans and going with a new third-party administrator. And we had great customer service. Like basically all the complaints we're hearing about now, they were really good at. So we feel confident in their ability to serve us well. It is definitely different circumstances than what they were than how they were serving us before. Very different plans now with the consumer-directed high deductible plans. But both the union right now, they're surveying members right now, so that's in process. But early indication is there's agreed upon interest from both parties to move away from DataPath, who's been, it seems, equally as challenging to work with as health future planning, and to go to somebody that we've had good experience with, that we've personally vetted with plans like ours, with fairly substantial organizations, to feel confident in what we'll get for service. It will change a little bit in the way things happen right now. To give you a quick snapshot, may be more than you want to know, but I think it helps to set the context. Right now, an employee goes to the doctor's office. They're not to pay anything, although their card, I think, does work, only it shouldn't. And if they pay for it with their card, their debit card that they get through this health insurance plan, it completely messes things up. But even if they do what they're supposed to, they go to the doctor's office, they don't pay, that their services, that information is sent to Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Blue Cross and Blue Shield then sends the explanation of benefits to our third-party administrator. Third-party administrator is supposed to pay directly the service provider. Keeps the employee out of the loop, which sounds great. Until something doesn't go right, and the employee has no information about who did what, and as they try to figure out what happened, there's fingers pointed in all sorts of different directions. They can't get clear information, and the service provider says, I don't really care about that. You got a service from us, you owe us money, we want the money, and if you don't give it to us, we're sending you to collections. That's where we find ourselves right now. That's sort of the crux of the situation.
So DataPath switched that in the district that I'm involved in, and they were paying directly into our checking account.
That's what they told me.
It was direct deposit, and we had to pay the provider.
And so there's a whole lot of, and there are 100 other different scenarios that DataPath is trying to manage. Part of this is we have created somewhat of an impossible scenario for these folks that are trying to manage us as a state. To my knowledge, nobody else in the state is using ABS. So there's sort of it feels more manageable, like they can handle the volume. Part of this is too, these companies, Future Planning, DataPath, took on 40,000 members that they didn't have before and weren't necessarily prepared to get that all at once. So they're certainly feeling the pinch there. Taking on a few hundred members in addition to health ABS feels manageable. But the change in the way that process would work is, and this is sort of the ideal, and we feel confident this can work given our past history and reference checks with ABS. Employee goes to the doctor's office sends information to Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Blue Cross and Blue Shield sends the explanation of benefits to the individual, to the employee. Employee then sends that to ABS. ABS gives employee money. Employee gives that money to the healthcare provider. So it puts more on the employee, but it also gives them more information. Like they can say, I paid you with check number XYZ on this date. I know you've been paid.
Is this all going to change when we go to a statewide?
Yeah.
Maybe.
So
And it could change.
Just making it better.
We're also going to be negotiating soon. So this would at least cover us for the January to January, because once we sign on with a particular understanding, we're sort of committed to that for the plan year, which is January through end of December.
I can just add one thing. DataPath took on a difficult task, taking on the whole state of Vermont, pretty much, education system in this healthcare. I don't think they were prepared to handle it. I've asked their people questions and phone calls that we've had, and basically some of the questions they can't answer. One of the things I'm concerned with is that the data that's not clean for calendar year 18 may trickle into calendar year 19. By breaking clean with them and starting with a new provider, they will start with fresh information. Eventually 18 will get cleaned up and that'll take care of itself. But to contaminate 19's data with 18's data is something that I don't think I want to put the people of this district through. So.
And I think for me, another big picture, which is a great thing, and there are other examples of it, but this is one example. This is the teachers union and central office administration working together to solve a problem, which is a good thing.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the motion is to authorize the board chair to sign the healthcare side letter with the association. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
And one piece just to add, there may not be a need for a side letter, that we're still trying to figure out with the contract language if we're actually still abiding by the language. So obviously there's no need for a side letter, there's nothing that Dawn would need to sign, but if there is, then she has the authorization to engage in that.
Sorry, I know we've already voted, but does this affect the support staff as well, their contract? So it's both professional and... Yeah. Okay.
And I just feel like I have to say this because we went through with the last one, and I know we had significant discussion at the Moncton board meeting. I realize Moncton board's not here anymore, but there was significant concern about it not being a very good practice for the board to approve the chair signing a letter that the board had not actually seen or reviewed any of the language of. So I realize we have voted, and I did vote in favor of it, but in general, I would suggest that if we want to approve, you know, we should actually look at it, because really this is a blanket authorization for you to negotiate anything you want and sign it. Mm-hmm. And I certainly trust your motives, and I'm sure it will all work out fine. But in general, we should probably have a little more direct information.
Mm-hmm. I agree, that's an excellent practice, and one that needs to be in place. There's still a couple of questions to iron out in this particular scenario, and we have to decide tomorrow. Because our window to move away from our contract with data path closes.
Yeah. Oh,
We just needed to position ourselves to be able to get this done.
Yep. Okay. Next action item is to authorize the board chair to sign documents in the event of a change to the third-party administrator for healthcare.
So moved.
All right, Steve.
I second.
And Andrew.
No further explanation.
No, any further questions? All right, all those in favor of authorizing the board chair to sign documents in the event of a change of the third-party administrator for healthcare, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, now we're down to discussion. Facilities, go.
So I shared with you,
lots of buildings.
I shared with you a fairly significant shift from previous approaches for building renovations. I recognize it's kind of big, but it's also kind of exciting. And for those home viewing audience members, the idea being, so it has historically been the Mount Abe board attempting to get a renovation and bond passed for Mount Abraham specifically. Recently, the Mount Abraham Unified School District Board, you guys, have assumed responsibility for what are we going to do with this 3 failed bond attempt situation we find ourselves in. A key difference that is highlighted in what I shared with you is that you are not only responsible for Mount Abe, you're responsible for all 6, and really 7 if we think about the central office needs facilities. So there were conversations around the process of Act 46 about school closure. We're sitting in the smallest school in our district that has declined in enrollment by 20-some students over the last couple of years, which represents about 20-some% of its student body. It puts people in a place where questions start getting asked about closing schools, in particular our small schools. which to me it approaches the situation from a deficit model. I think we have an opportunity to look at this from an opportunities perspective instead of a deficit perspective. It is true, we got the tour earlier today, Travis pointed out some buildings, some rooms that are not classrooms anymore. That's true in every one of our schools. In reality, we've lost over 300 students in the last 9 years. That's almost half of what's at Mount Abe right now. That's more than what's at Bristol, our largest elementary school. It's more than any 2 other schools combined. That's the number of students we've lost. That's created space in our buildings. That space, like, rooms aren't empty of furniture and not being used for something, but it has created space. And again, we can look at that as a reason for closing schools, or we can think about what are some creative ideas about how we utilize space in our schools, and what are some creative ideas about how we utilize our schools in general. And so to engage the community in something as meaningful and as significant about how do we utilize our facilities, and have that connect to the strategic plan, which was very collaboratively developed, which I think articulates some of the core values of our community. And I think about the community engagement we just had, which I think also suggested to some extent what core values are, but I think we could even unpack the idea of core values even further through community engagement, and then use that to drive how do we best utilize our facilities to fit with what we have identified as our core values within the strategic plan, and just really look at it in a really comprehensive way. And then with a plan in place about what we want to do, then what are the needs our schools have to be able to support that? And then what does that require for a bond at Mount Abe or beyond?
Sarah?
Can I just say something just like on the point of that all the schools have empty rooms? Lincoln has one room that's not being used as a per se classroom, but that's because we lost a class. Mm-hmm. But it's still being used for music, but it's, if we had kept our first grade, that, we needed that space if we hadn't lost that class. So I just wanted to make that point, that it's not for lack of the amount of students.
Any other questions around the?
I think the long-term scenario you described is exactly what needs to happen. I'm a little bit curious about just the short term. My questions are mainly on the short term. I'm assuming that you're talking about a building assessment for each of the buildings.
To me, that's the short term, is spend the money, and it, unfortunately, everything costs money, and everything costs more than I wish it did. But spend the money to collect the information that we can then use to make informed decisions about how to utilize our schools, and then what are the needs going to be to realize that vision.
Well, and also maybe an actual assessment of the physical plant itself.
Right.
Jen?
So I think it's really an interesting idea to move forward with a series of community engagements around the facilities. I know we've seen so much interest from members of the 5-Town Community Forum group on topics particularly about facilities, so it does seem like there is an interest in that. I guess I have a question for myself. It's not really clear to me if this would fall within the current charge of the Community Engagement Committee. I mean, I think we struggled with this last spring because there was a suggestion that the Community Engagement Committee should hold a forum about, the facilities or about the bond. And the challenge that we kept running into, and I am only speaking for myself, and I don't know if other members of the committee feel differently about this, but my perspective was we kept running into, but we don't know what the questions are that need to get asked about the bond. Like, our job is kind of to figure out how to talk with the community, how to have events that get the community there. So I think that there is a place for that to be connected. But I also feel like perhaps there needs to be another group that is thinking more specifically about the facilities and charting the path forward, or even, what kind of input do we need to get? And I think, to me, that's separate than the Community Engagement Committee.
Kevin?
So I think what you're talking about, Patrick, is something much more tactical, and I agree with that. That we've got space, there needs to be a space analysis done. It needs to be matched up with the metrics that are being driven through occupancy, student counts. It needs to be measured against what, state standards, state's projections, all that kind of stuff, which is all very mechanical. And then with that information, you can go out and start asking people what their appetite is. I would also recommend that since we would look afresh, not only with that information, but with the consultant that we would use to do that. With three failed bond votes with Dora Whittier, which seemed to give a really, at least the perception is, a really pie in the sky, gilded solution. I'm not sure that if we went through this tactical assessment and came out with something like that, all the opportunity would be lost.
I think you raise a really important point, and I have sort of two thoughts, and it connects back to the community engagement piece too. I think it would require the support of a consultant to conduct the assessments and make sure we're doing the right assessments to get the right information so that it's really useful to help make some of those decisions. And it doesn't have to be Dora Whittier. I think the kinds of assessments we're looking for are the kinds of assessments that architect firms tend to do as part of these bigger picture things. But there are lots of architectural firms that we could work with, and this is sort of a different flavor than what it has been in the past. So it's an opportunity to go with a different firm if we feel like that's something that we want to do for political reasons, if nothing else. If that's the perception that's in the community, I think that perception is reality to individuals. So we have to wrestle with that. And likewise, I think it's something we would want support from a professional facilitator to really conduct these community engagement activities in a way that is effective and yields the outcomes that we're looking for. And for me, the outcomes I'm looking for is there's clarity from the community perspective about what they want for their schools and what our community values are, and then we sort of have a plan on how to use our schools that matches what our community values are.
Liz?
And even just your classroom values, if you're thinking about having more online just the very many different ways that you can educate children, and just considering what can you do with it even without a renovation. So even separate, because it seems like, you probably already are using the rooms for other things, as you mentioned, but just, virtual classrooms, I don't know, but this, whatever serves your purposes of bringing the students access to education.
Well, I think that's the piece that's really important, is it can't be about what I want. We mentioned the average 3-year lifespan of a superintendent. I don't think we should be talking about what I want our schools to do. It's really important that this is what the community wants for its schools, and that we have an understanding of that. And to sort of think about an example, it seems based on the surveys that we've done so far as part of the strategic planning process and the vision mission process, community values that keep surfacing are personalization and community connectedness. So even if we just were to run with that, how would we think about the way in which we use our schools toward the goal of personalization and community connectedness? We might do some things very differently in the ways in which we utilize the spaces that we have with that in mind. And there's lots of different ideas about what we could do to support that if that's identified as our community values.
What kind of timeline do you envision? Because I'm just thinking about our group meeting, our community engagement meeting, and there's lots of different things people are interested in talking about, and I guess I'm wondering, should we put this toward the top of the list? And also with the budget, I'm assuming you're going to include a proposal for money toward assessing the current state of our buildings. So.
Yeah. Or utilize the money that's in there now to do more assessment than take action on the facilities.
Yeah.
So maybe rather than put new flooring in somewhere, put it toward assessments, or I mean, it's bigger than that, because the cost could be significant to conduct these assessments, especially across 6 buildings.
Yep.
But it's valuable information.
Do you feel at this point you need a subcommittee from the board to help you with this, or is this something you feel like you can, with your new facilities personnel, you're able to?
I think with the new facilities personnel and then engaging again with professionals, like there are people who do these kinds of assessments or oversee these assessments from subcontractors that really know. So bringing, it would be researching and vetting and all that and selecting a vendor that can meet our needs, and then working with that vendor to articulate the kind of information we're looking for and for what purpose, so that they can really support us in getting that information. So I feel like that's in my head where the direction that I think makes sense.
Is that, once you get that group put together, do you need to come back to the board to spend the money on that effort?
It's money that's budgeted.
Okay.
It's using money differently. So there's, somewhere around $1.5 million in the budget for facilities. Some of it, a big portion of it, earmarked for construction services, which these assessments historically. So when Dora and Whittier did their work and it came out of construction services, these assessments are part of that. It's sort of the prelude to construction. So, so it feels like a reasonable use of those funds. But it does mean there's some things that we won't be doing with money that we would have otherwise done. So that's part of what we'll have to balance.
Kind of leads me to my next question, which was the short term. Alden had put together that spreadsheet, earmarking different tasks for different dollars for different schools for different years. Are you still following that in any way, or is that, are we neglecting anything important?
I don't think we're neglecting anything important.
Trying to get reorganized here.
Right.
Still need to have money.
Well, Joel and I have gone to 2 schools now, and we plan on going to the other 4 schools over the next week. He's making assessments with me to see what just general repair maintenance needs to be done, and also looking toward our 5-year plan so we can make modifications to it. We have a food service program that has needs too, so that has to be met. So we're starting to look at these different things to incorporate them. Getting a fresh eye on things helps sometimes, so it's always helpful when you're doing the work year after year after year, that when you get fresh eyes in there, that they can bring up good ideas that maybe haven't either fell through the cracks or we haven't thought of in the past.
I would also add that Alden's 5-year plan, which considered several things, was very skeletal.
Oh yeah.
As well, so there's a lot you can build off that yet. Fill in
Absolutely.
a lot of blanks.
Allison?
So to address the 5,000-pound elephant in the room, how long do you think Mount Abe can last before we have at least probably $12 million worth of basic health, safety, access stuff that needs to be done. And are you thinking we can hold out for another 2 years while we do these assessments and have community forums and talk about it and hope that we pass a bond for $50 million that includes Mount Abe and then all of the other schools? Not trying to be antagonistic,
If
but
I could answer that question, there's a whole lot of other things that I would be able to figure out too, because I'd have a great crystal ball. I don't know. I can't say. I don't know what. We had no idea the gym floor issue was going to come up.
Right.
I don't know what next event is waiting.
I'm thinking of plumbing, heating, and the air quality for the students in that place is
I guess
not
part of me.
good, and
So
there's safety.
I've wrestled
access,
with all of that, and how many years ago did we start trying to get a bond?
Oh, I know.
With our current approach?
2013.
So it's been 5 years.
Right.
we could spend another 5 years going at it the same way, getting the same result. This is at least a different approach.
I was thinking maybe with Mount Abe, we figure out a number that doesn't increase our taxes, put that out for a bond.
That's an option. Do sort of a low-level bond that gets as much as we can think a $10 or $12 million bond as a low-level bond,
No,
but it's considerably less than what we've been
I
seeking.
have an idea, you know, there's got to be, we know how much 29 was going to cost us. We had a pretty good idea about what 25 was going to cost us, and you know, maybe 23, 22. Not trying to dictate, but maybe that is enough to not increase taxes and get us working on the things that we need to have done with the overall vision for the school itself dictating what needs to happen. I understand that people get really frustrated when either we are unable to articulate a clear plan about which room goes where and which window and which door and all of that, but I'm hoping, I don't know, I just wish that there was a way that not raising taxes but get the biggest dollar amount out of that and just get to work on that school, because so many things have been put off.
Well, one of the things that's a problem with this whole, in order to get a bond to not be into per student calculations, that it can't be over deferred maintenance. And at the first one, when David Adams was here, I was asked if I could answer that question. And I'll be honest with you, deferred maintenance has gone over to school for 50 years.
Yeah.
And basically to sign that form and get it, so you may go to the state and get this bond approved, and the commissioner has to decide whether, based on your findings, this is just deferred maintenance or this is actually a bond change. So sometimes just papering over stuff to get it fixed may be considered deferred maintenance, and that amount of money that we're spending for the payments may not be exempt from the per pupil equalized pupil calculations, and basically would cause this district an extreme cost. So we have to be careful how we structure that particular idea.
But to clarify to Allison's point, if we're only using the money that's already in the budget to pay for the bond, i.e. not raising taxes, we're already paying for that against the cost per equalized pupil.
You're never going to get to the level you need to get to.
No, but we worked it into the budget in case we got a bond, and then we were just going to shift it.
Right.
So what's the capacity to get that amount up to a nice big number, but doesn't raise the taxes?
And I think what I'm hearing you say is let's get however much we can in a bond to put before the voters that doesn't increase taxes at all, to put into the school, Mount Abe specifically, while simultaneously engaging in this community engagement process to talk about our schools and how we want to utilize them.
But how do we put
So are
10
you
to 12
saying-
million together without raising?
Are you saying like, right, I don't know what the number is, there's $500,000 of
$1 million.
facilities, $1 million of facilities money, so you're saying that we could propose a bond where instead of spending that $1 million on facilities, we'd spend that $1 million on paying the bond?
Yes.
So that the
That's what we did.
taxpayers didn't have to pay it?
Kevin?
So, I understand, Mount Abe, there is a certain level of opinion that some of the safety, health, code things are overstated in the building, based on Dora Whittier's layouts. The other thing to think about is, while Mount Abe has a heating problem and all that kind of stuff, we're sitting in a room with crackling radiators and opening up windows to cool ourselves off in another one of the buildings that we're responsible for.
I don't want to cut this conversation short, but we are getting later and later, and we still have some important stuff we have to get to, and I'm thinking people are going to start checking out at any time now. I think this is going to come back again, but we're going to have to keep digging into it, and at some point we're going to have to make some, decide something to give us some direction, so. Jen?
Yeah, I think that, to me, what we as a board need to do is we need to decide whether we're gonna continue to tackle this as a whole board. And I'm not saying we decide it right now, but we should probably talk about it again next month. Are we gonna keep trying to work on this as a whole board? Are we gonna try and delegate it to some group or people or something? Because we can't just keep talking about it and not doing anything. Like, we have to have a plan that leads us to taking actual actions.
I have a survey I'd like to spread out.
All right, I'm gonna move us right on. Next item is to discuss, review of budget development timeline that was included in your packet. So.
And I'll just try to answer any questions that you have about that. I don't have anything further to add.
Krista.
I had a note. I guess I was just wondering if we should clarify engagement versus information as far as board community, because I think, so we did a forum in October, and then we have in December where we're reviewing the draft budget. It looks like that's the first time we're gonna see a budget. And then we have in January, host a school budget community forum. And I'm wondering if January is really like an information meeting and not a forum, and we should be clear about that if that's the case. And if that's the case, where are people going to actually be able to provide, where are we going to engage people, and would that be in December?
There is something listed in December, for the community, attend school budget community forum prior to board meeting.
Okay, so that's an engagement. Or is that what you're referring to in January?
Oh, it looks like maybe they got mixed. Because in January, we're hosting, but in December, the community's coming, so I'm guessing that those are supposed to be in the same month.
There you go.
I was like, wow, we have even more forums, but I think that maybe they belong in the same month, whichever.
So I think
And that's fine.
January's too late to engage
Well,
the
right,
community
I just
to
want
get
to make.
feedback on what they.
Exactly, and I
Well,
know we typically
right.
share information, but that's, that's different than engaging, and so I just want to, it seems like it would be good to have that engagement around a draft, but that's different than the get out the vote, because here's what we've got.
And I guess when I'm thinking, I'm using community engagement in a broader sense, that it can be both about collecting input, it can be gathering feedback, or it can be sharing information. I'm sort of using the term to suggest that those are all different forms of community engagement. But I think you're right.
Timing wise.
Right. At what point do we collect information to
And that's
inform
what
the
I
budget
think
building
we
process,
need.
and at what point are we sharing, so here's what we've decided with all that information we collected from you.
Right. So is December, as far as collecting input, so we would get a draft, like, sort of end of December, because that's when we have our meetings, right, the 3rd or whatever Tuesday of the month.
So we're not gonna get a draft at the end of November.
I think our meeting's at a different time in that schedule.
December.
So here's the trick. So we may very well not have equalized pupil data till after that November board meeting, and as you now know, our entire budget is built around that equalized pupil number that we have to work with. So everything up until that point is making predictions. So we could put together a budget based on whatever target is set with our estimate of what the equalized pupil is. But at $16,000 and change per student, a swing, any significant swing in number of kids that we're estimating ends up being, real money.
So when is the last point at which, so we vote in January though?
Right, so by the end of January, the
We
board has to
adopt.
have adopted a budget.
Right.
And that's based on the timeline to be able to have everything ready for the town meeting day.
Right. Informational meeting and then the vote.
30 to 40 days, not less than 30, not more than 40 days prior to town meeting.
And I think that the dollar amounts, I can see that, flexing and shifting, but is there a way to still get feedback on the priorities and the direction? With, that maybe that's where we're at, because otherwise we don't really have any time.
And to me, that's been the reason.
based upon a set of parameters.
Right.
That you all agreed are important to us.
Right.
Exactly.
You just apply that to whatever the shift in the numbers is.
Right.
And to me, that's the way I see the process working, is this board hears the thoughts about from the community. This board then utilizes that information to direct me as superintendent to develop a budget that fits with those targets. So, and some of that is, I guess what I'd be looking for from the board is what percent increase or decrease on the cost per equalized pupil is the target you're giving to me. I think that's now sort of the new metric. That's what we strive for, is increase in cost per pupil versus increase in spending, as it had historically been previously. It used to be, is it going to be 1%, 2%, 3% more in spending next year than last year or this year? Now it's really based on the equalized pupil count, because that's how budgets are built, and that's what thresholds are now set on, and things of that nature. But to utilize, to articulate what the community feedback is, and for that to inform your direction to me in setting that target is really useful. And then I need to weigh that community input with the vision, the mission, the ends. Where's there alignment, or isn't there alignment perhaps? How does it fit with a strategic plan? And tie all of that information together in the decisions that lead to me presenting a budget that meets the target and addresses all of those various perspectives.
But it seems really hard to just ask the community what percentage increase or decrease would you support. And so I guess I'm wondering three things. So like, when do you need, we got feedback already from our forum. One thing I'm wondering is, could we put that feedback back out and then ask for additional feedback, tweaking it to meet more of this ultimate goal of getting, could we do more with that to get at this answer? And also, when do you need to really know? Like, yesterday, but I mean realistically.
So we talked about timing earlier. The reality is the majority of the budget building process is built upon assumptions, and over time we get to sort of knock assumptions out and replace them with factual information as information trickles in. I'm going to have to start already making assumptions about what I think this board is going to end up with as a target as I start thinking about how to build towards something. In the meantime, you'll be thinking about that target, and I think the target has to be an X percentage of increase or decrease on equalized pupil. Because I think the third priority identified in that was finding efficiencies or controlling cost or something. There was a cost aspect that came out of that feedback from the forum as I think the third priority. So I recognize that's a real pressure. I'm not going to start building a budget that's a 5% increase on cost per equalized pupil, because I bet we're not going to go there. But I'm also probably not going to start building something at 0%, because I don't know if we'll go there. So I have to start getting some thoughts together, make assumptions about equalized pupils, make assumptions about need for next year, see where that puts us, begin the massaging, then I'll get more information, massage some more, and continue to get more information and continue to massage.
Well, the next topic is drivers and assumptions, which I'm assuming, what I would want to know is a little bit about what we're looking at down the road, which is what was my major concern last year when we were saying we were going to knock this, we had to reduce staff by this much, was it the 2% or the 1.5% or the 1%? And my biggest concern was, what were we looking at the following year? Were we looking at not having enough of a fund balance carryover? Was that, where was that number hitting? Or were you really pushing the limit on the staff ratios so that we knew we were going to have to drop some more? So, what were the things that were basically making the year after more difficult because we didn't do it this year, kind of
So before we move on, to get into the drivers and assumptions, I just want to check, Liz had a comment, and before we leave this subject on to the next one, did you?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, it's similar though, it was just, because there's an automatic increase, right? Just based on keeping everything the same, there's a percentage to that. So
Typically speaking, keeping everything the same moving forward, it's a 2+% increase in overall spending. When we're talking about cost per equalized pupil, there's an additional factor of, is that equalized pupil number going up or down? So even a 2% increase in spending could be a 3% increase in equalized pupils, cost per equalized pupil, or a 1% if that number goes up. Our projection right now, really rough, not quite even behind the back of the napkin kind of sketching, is we're going to decrease the equalized pupil again. I don't think as significantly as we did last time or the year before that. But we do have, 30-something fewer students this year than previously in the prior year. So that's going to factor in.
How did the budget vote go last year as far as what was the results from the vote?
I think it's in the end.
It is. It was practically 50-50. They passed.
The percentage of the voters that voted for it? It's in the end?
Yeah, page 11.
What was the last
On page 11.
Okay, there we go.
So Dawn, I have a procedural question. So, I mean, the timeline says that we're setting our budget target, which is something we normally do in October, but it's not actually on the agenda.
Correct.
Where does
So
that leave us?
that's gonna leave us into November, at this point, because it's, not defined and we can't add, at this point, we can't add an action item in. I could have added it at the beginning, but I missed it. And it's probably wiser to add it in when everybody has the knowledge ahead of time that we're gonna be discussing it. So it'll be on the November, I already have a note to be on the November. And Patrick will have, in the next month, there'll be more information that continues to grow and change.
And that does squeeze things a little bit, but I think the importance of being able to reflect on the information that was just shared with you guys, I think yesterday, is important leading into that discussion. So the input from the community forum. So we can certainly work with that.
Getting painful. I do think, and I know it's incredibly late, but I do think though that as far as thinking about when we want to have a community engagement around the budget, I think it is, because if we don't talk about that until November, it's not going to happen in December, it's going to happen in January, right? Realistically, because this last one we planned it in 6 weeks, and she was like, "You people are insane," right? And so it was really tight. We had some date conflicts that were, caused some challenges, and so I think that if there's a desire to have a community input in December, which would possibly be, I don't know. I think it worked okay having it in January, but basically having the feedback at the beginning of January meant we had one meeting in which we had to process that feedback and adopt a budget all in that same one meeting. So if it happens earlier, we have less clear information to share. We maybe are getting it's a different type, it's maybe less sharing of this is what we think is going to be in the budget. Maybe it's more of a conversation. I don't know. I'm speculating. It gives perhaps more time to react to any feedback we have, but also having engagement in December. It's December.
I was going to say it'll have to be early because December is essentially half a month.
Well,
so it would have to be early.
Our board meeting in December is the 18th.
Yeah.
So we're 6 weeks from that
already.
Yeah. Definitely.
But there are other options that we can consider at the next community engagement thing, like just extending the survey further.
That's what I was
Yeah, we can use other methods.
Yeah. I'm comfortable with our committee trying to come up with a plan about that. If this group is okay with that.
Yeah.
Jen, I know,
We're pushing almost 2 hours over.
I know when I start planning my department's annual budget, I go with, we're getting no extra money. So we have what we have in terms of what we gotta pay people and insurance and all that. Not going above currently what we have. And then if we get extra, yeah. we have a little bit of breathing room. So one thought would be to take the budget dollar that you have now and the number of students, equalized pupils you think you're going to get, and then the staffing that you're assuming you're going to need to meet our ends. And one thought, because you're gonna keep getting new data all the time anyway. So at least you would know, okay, no increase. This is what we can do.
And 75% of the budget is personnel related. So if we're already talking about not making personnel changes, that doesn't leave a whole lot to work with after that.
Well, we were talking about not doing the incentive. That's kind of what I was thinking, was like, it doesn't sound like there's a dire need to make a big adjustment, apparently, to avoid, something precipitous next year, if that's the case, so.
Okay, everybody stand up just stand up, stand up.
Does anyone have gum?
Everybody just stand up for a minute. We're gonna move right on. Does anybody have any gotta know it, gotta have it at this meeting, questions on anticipated drivers and assumptions?
No.
All right.
I always change
All right.
anyway.
So, and we're gonna need that executive session, but we're gonna limit ourselves to 10 minutes. So I'm gonna go here and see if there's any public comment at this time.
I do. And basically, and it's because of people leaving the district. I know you don't want me to talk about personnel, but I will. I just want to recognize Kathy Ladd, who worked for our district for 5 years. She did payroll for us the first 3 years. Last 2 years, she's actually worked on a fiscal budget, and she's basically helped with her successors and training them. And the second person I want to recognize is Alden Harwood. And I think if anybody goes around to any of these schools that he's been in the last 7 years, you're going to see great improvement. And whether it's the pool cover that we fought over, that basically with people that didn't want it, whether it's the camera systems, whether it's paving projects, roofing projects, we got them done. And here's the metric for Alden. When we went to Mount Abe originally, when I came here, the bill for the electric was $17,000
per month.
Per month. You know what I got a bill for this month? 10. So if you want to look at a metric, there's one to look at.
Thank you.
All right, so we are in need of another executive session around, coincidentally, around the same title, VSA 1313A3, the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer or employee. We will not be taking any action when we come out regarding this executive session. The only action we'll take is to adjourn the meeting. So I will entertain a motion to go into executive session and invite Patrick, Katrina, and Susan to join us.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
Andrew
Sarah,
and Sarah That's 9:48. All those in favor of going into executive session? Aye. Please say aye. Any opposed? All right, any abstentions?